O eternal and almighty God, from whom all power and wisdom come, we are assembled here before thee to frame such laws as may tend to the welfare and prosperity of our province. Grant, O merciful God, we pray thee, that we may desire only that which is in accordance with thy will, that we may seek it with wisdom and know it with certainty and accomplish it perfectly, for the glory and honor of thy name and for the welfare of all our people. Amen. Please be seated. The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
I rise on a matter of contempt.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Order, please. I'm going to have to point out to the Honourable Member for St. Boniface that he is not dressed accordingly to the code of the Legislature, and I'm going to have to tell the member that he needs to have a tie to be in the chamber and to be acknowledged. Thank you. We accept your apology. Routine proceedings, introduction of bills. Committee reports. Tabling of reports. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development and Jobs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to table the Manitoba Development Corporation 2020 Annual Report.
Ministerial statements. The Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage, and I would note that the required 90 minutes notice prior to routine proceedings was provided in accordance with our Rule 26, Bracket 2. Would the Honourable Minister please proceed with her statement?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, March 8, marks International Women's Day in Manitoba and around the world. And on this day, people across the globe celebrate the hard-won, collective progress we have made towards women's rights. Today is also an opportunity to reflect on the status of women in society and reaffirm our commitments to advancing legal and economic equality for women and freedom from violence. Women in our province and across the world are making a difference during this pandemic. They have become leaders in our fight against COVID-19. We must continue to support women and ensure there are no barriers that hold women back. We must change the narrative and continue to support and celebrate the women who are leading innovation and challenging the status quo. I am proud of the work our government is doing to support women and stand up for gender equality. Just this past September, our government reached gender parity amongst our deputy ministers for the first time ever in Manitoba history, Madam Speaker. Nearly a third of Manitoba's cabinet ministers are women, and Minister Audrey Gordon made history this year as women's first,
Order,
Manitoba's
please.
First.
Order. Just a reminder to the Minister that we are not allowed by our rules to mention colleagues by name, only by their positions. The Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am proud to work alongside my colleagues each and every day to help build a healthier, more inclusive and prosperous Manitoba. In December, our government released Manitoba's framework to address gender-based violence. This important framework builds on Manitoba government's commitment and actions to address gender-based violence and outlines how our government is organizing itself to address this critical issue. Our government recognizes the importance of investing and promoting women in non-traditional careers as a key component of economic recovery efforts from the impacts of this pandemic. This morning, Madam Speaker, I had the privilege of announcing 2 programs that will increase women's representation in the areas of technology and skilled trades. Our government has invested $25,000 with the Manitoba Institute of Trades and Technology towards their Empower program and to attract young women to join their information and communication technology training programs. And we have granted Manitoba Institute of Trades and Technology $25,000 to continue this program. We have also granted the Manitoba Construction Sector Council $25,000 to assist young women in exploring careers in heavy construction, in partnership with the River East Transcona School Division. Madam Speaker, this year's international theme is Choose to Challenge. And we all know that a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. I would like to join with everyone as we celebrate International Women's Day and call for change for Manitobans and Canadians in trying to make a positive difference for women here and around the world. Happy International Women's Day.
The Honourable Member for Notre Dame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is not just today, but every day that my colleagues and I acknowledge and honor the work of women in Manitoba and across the world for their significant contributions to daily life and our economies. Women make up less than half of our nation's workers, but account for 63% of all job losses. Women make up the majority of folks on the front line, whether it is for community-based organizations, healthcare, retail, services, and hospitality sectors. And all of these sectors were really hit hard by the pandemic. The CCPA released a policy brief this morning that notes that women are overrepresented among minimum wage and low wage workers, and that Manitoba women lost the second highest percentage of jobs out of all the Canadian provinces. Manitoba women's unemployment rate is now 9.4%, which is up from 4.9% from last January 2020. With all of this information available, the government needs to develop sector-specific supports that considers the lived experiences of Manitoba women. These supports must factor in childcare considerations, as women are most likely to be juggling both careers and homemaker responsibilities. We urge the government to invest more in training opportunities, apprenticeships, and career development. Women need more wage subsidiary opportunities and micro-credential programming to increase their representation in trade careers. Women's unemployment rates have doubled in the last year by nearly 10%, and that's why it's imperative for the Minister of Economic Development and Jobs to show concern and support for women in the Manitoba economy, and not just leaving it up to the minister responsible for the status of women. To all Manitoba women and women all around the world, my colleagues and I hear you, and we stand by you. We wish you all a safe and happy International Women's Day. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask for leave to respond to the Minister's statement.
Does the member have leave to respond to the ministerial statement? Leave has been granted. The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and happy International Women's Day. This is the second consecutive year now where celebrating International Women's Day has changed quite a bit due to us not being able to get together in person. But this year, organizations have had enough time to prepare virtual events. Just yesterday, Madam Speaker, I was able to virtually participate with a couple of my colleagues, including the members for Notre Dame and Burroughs, in the PNI Association of Manitoba's International Women's Day event. On top of this year's theme, Choosing to Challenge, the group decided to dedicate the event to our healthcare, frontline, and essential workers, providing proper recognition to those who have and continue to risk their own health and well-being in some way for our province. Focusing on this year's theme, I decided to challenge myself, and I came up with an idea and wrote to you, Madam Speaker, in a letter last week. I understand that this letter has since been forwarded to the Minister of Central Services and the Clerk of the Executive Council. I won't read the whole letter here, but I will table it and in summary share with the House the essence of the letter and how there is value for the Legislative Assembly to canvass the hundreds and hundreds of employees here at the Ledge about resources and needs that employees may have, for example, on-site childcare. The letter further explains how often, as legislators, we encourage workplaces to better accommodate families and their needs. And that's why I think we should lead by example and strive for the legislative building to be a more modern institution. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and happy International Women's Day, everyone.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise on a matter of contempt.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface is rising on a matter of contempt. The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The issue of contempt of Parliament or contempt of the Legislature is not to be raised lightly. I'm raising this matter of contempt at the earliest possible opportunity, given new facts that have only come to light in the last few days, as well as a brief period required to research and prepare this matter. That new information was a public statement by the MLA for Radisson, posted on social media, that the 19 placeholder blank bills that the government attempted to introduce last November had not even been finalized. We believe that this government's decision to table 19 blank placeholders and claiming it to be bills, though no text was available and may not even have existed, is a breach of democratic norms so great that it meets the threshold for contempt. Now, there is an important distinction here to be made about what constitutes contempt as distinct from a breach of privilege, which is directly relevant to the case at hand. Chapter 8 of the book Contempt of Parliament by Kieran Wood states that while almost every breach of privilege can be contempt, not every contempt is a breach of privilege. A handbook on parliamentary procedures published in 2006 by the Government of Queensland, Australia said, quote, contempt of Parliament, end quote, was much wider than just breach of privilege because it included, quote, any offence against the dignity of the House or interference with its process where no established privilege has previously existed, end quote. The website of the New Zealand Parliament said there are many acts other than breaches of privilege, which, although they do not interfere with freedom of speech, freedom from arrest, or the House's other privileges, nevertheless interfere with the work or the House of its members,
Order,
not
please.
being violations of a...
Order. Order, please. I am going to indicate to the member that that particular issue is under advisement. It has to be ruled on, and I would indicate to the member that he has not put forward any new information related to that. He is referring back to some members to some privileges that are already under advisement, and as such, that is not allowed to be spoken about in the House until those rulings come down. And he appears to be making some comments, or he appears to be indicating something based on comments made outside of the House by a member. Comments made outside of a House by a member cannot be something that I address as a speaker. The speaker only has the authority to deal with issues that and comments that are made in the House or in committee. A speaker cannot rule on comments that people make outside of the chamber. I do not have that authority to make. So respectfully, the member does not have a matter of privilege or a matter of contempt. Member statements. The Honourable Member for Selkirk.
Madam Speaker, today on International Women's Day, I celebrate a very special woman from the Selkirk constituency. Elder Ruth Christie, a retired nurse, brilliant storyteller, historian, keeper and educator of Indigenous knowledge, honorary Doctor of Law from the University of Winnipeg, and most recently, a recipient of the Manitoba 150 Trailblazer Award from the Nellie McClug Foundation. Ruth's story began in her home community of Loon Straits, Manitoba. At the age of 12, Ruth was afflicted with rheumatic fever. Despite this, she would go on to complete her grade 6 studies by having a cousin sneak in textbooks, assignments, and test papers without her parents' knowledge. Ruth's driven nature saw her leave her home community to attend nurses training at a time in history when Indigenous women faced many hardships and challenges in obtaining an education in the healthcare field. Ruth returned to her home community as a trained nurse. This achievement would see her featured in a book called Twice as Good, a story, a history of Aboriginal nurses. Ruth is a world-renowned storyteller, a gift that appeared at a very young age. Her storytelling has taken her on an ox cart from Pembina, North Dakota to the Forks, across the Atlantic Ocean to Iceland, and across Lake Winnipeg by canoe. She has spent 20 years at Lower Fort Garry educating students and tourists on Indigenous history and what it was like living through settlement times. Today, Ruth continues her knowledge sharing at the University of Winnipeg, Selkirk Friendship Center, and within the Lord Selkirk School Division. Ruth has lived by the words of her grandmother. If you know where you come from, you'll always know where you are going. She is proud of her heritage and has made it her life's work to educate, share the positives, and correct misconceptions of Indigenous culture. Madam Speaker, it is an honor to celebrate Elder Ruth Christie, a cherished community member. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Speaker, last night on the eve of International Women's Day, myself and the member for Union Station attended a late-night vigil for Jana Williams, age 29. The remains of Miss Williams, pregnant with her third baby, were found near the Red River. Miss Williams' remains were thrown away like garbage, like Tina Fontaine and Felicia Solomon Osborne before her. Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit continue to be under attack in this province. Since last International Women's Day, we've seen the shooting death by the Winnipeg Police Service of 16-year-old Aisha Hudson. We've witnessed the murder of Joyce Echequan at the hands of healthcare providers at a Quebec hospital. We saw Chantal Moore and Regis Korchinski-Paquette die after coming into contact with the New Brunswick and Toronto police on wellness checks, Madam Speaker. Last month, we saw two of our houseless women die in a campfire, trying to keep warm, and while in a bus shelter. Months ago, all of Winnipeg was on alert for a missing 10-year-old Indigenous girl. International Women's Day isn't just about niceties or posting on social media. It's a day to commit to action and actually do something to tackle the myriad of issues that women face. So the question on this day is, where is the MMIWG-2S National Inquiry's Call for Justice? Where's the public inquiry into the shooting death of Aisha Hudson? And where is the care, justice, and protections for Indigenous women and girls? Finally, Madam Speaker, I dedicate my member statement to Jana Williams and to her family, and I ask for leave for a moment of silence.
Is there leave of the House for a moment of silence? Leave has been granted. Please stand. The Honourable Member for Radisson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's very good to be back here in the Legislature with you and with my colleagues from all sides of the House as we strive to serve our constituents and all Manitobans as best we can. March is Childhood Arthritis Month here in Canada. Juvenile arthritis affects more than 1,500 children in Manitoba, ranging from infants to young adults. That's 3 out of every 1,000 children. In fact, juvenile arthritis affects more children than any other chronic disease. Juvenile arthritis is a sometimes severe inflammation of the joints. The cause is not well known. It can be progressive and disabling, affecting not just the joints, but also the eyes and other organs. Over the years, I've spoken at hundreds of different events, but one that really stands out in my memory is the Faces of Childhood Arthritis Luncheon. There, I got to meet children who live with juvenile arthritis. I'll never forget meeting young Natalie and her little sister Allison, who shared their story on the big stage at the Metropolitan Entertainment Centre in front of hundreds of people. They spoke in the matter-of-fact way that children who have been heavily involved in the medical system can speak about the pain that they have endured, the corticosteroid injections that they've received, and the hope that newer biologic drugs offer them. And they were grateful for the special relationship that they had developed with the doctors and medical team that provided their care. These kids have to work incredibly hard to do what the rest of us would consider normal, but they do it every day and usually without complaint. And even through the pain, they manage to smile and enjoy life. They are incredibly brave. They're an inspiration to me and so many others about how to deal with adversity. And I am so very, very proud of them. So every day, but especially during Childhood Arthritis Month in March, please remember these brave kids and support efforts to combat and control juvenile arthritis. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Even though this government has replaced the disastrous former health minister, unfortunately what we've seen so far is a continuation of the same lack of knowledge and respect for people in the north. I'd like to focus on the vaccine rollout for the North. We as Northern MLAs have asked for, but have not yet had any meaningful conversation with anyone from the Minister's office on the vaccine rollout plan. I've tried to contact health officials only to be told I could only speak to the Minister about such things. So in that spirit, I've called the Minister's office several times, never actually spoken to the Minister, only her assistants. Told someone would get back to me, but no one has to date. The government's super center concept at the Vaxport located in Thompson simply does not work. The expectation for everyone from the north to make their way there to get vaccinated is silly at best. Seniors who have spent months staying home are now being told, get on a bus, get on a plane, go to Thompson. In some cases, that means being in close quarters with others for 8 hours or more. Now imagine just one person on the bus or plane already has COVID-19. Every one of those traveling together has now been exposed for many hours, potentially rendering the vaccine useless. It is my understanding that the Vaxport is not ready to receive people yet anyway, so folks who do fly in will now have to board a bus and go into Thompson and back. I've been in communication with several communities who've been left to scramble with the ever-changing plan. There is a much simpler solution, Madam Speaker. Take the vaccine to the people rather than the people to the vaccine. We know it can be transported because we have seen it taken to many communities already. To say community representatives and members of the communities are frustrated with this government and the constantly changing plan to transport people to Thompson would be an understatement. A supercenter may work in Winnipeg, but it is time for the government to listen to the people of the North and abandon this ill-conceived concept for the North. Please tell us the vaccine will be transported to our communities as it should be. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Waverley.
Madam Speaker, during the pandemic,
Order, please. Order. The member is going to have to use the microphone at the podium. The Honourable Member for Waverley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During the pandemic, many Manitobans have been enjoying the outdoors and what our province has to offer, and ice fishing has been one of them. Today, I'm honouring Waverley constituent and my good friend, Mr. Eric Labopa. Eric was born and raised in Winnipeg. His family had immigrated here from the Philippines. One of his lifelong passions has been recreational angling, a sport that he has enjoyed ever since his father taught him how to fish. Over the years, he has gradually become more and more involved in the local angling community, volunteering for various fundraisers and fishing events, joining clubs and tournaments, even securing partnerships based on his enthusiastic community engagement. In 2017, his weekend hobby culminated in a full-time job promoting the sport for Travel Manitoba, going on to become a territory sales manager for multiple fishing and hunting companies across this country. In that same year, Eric started the Filipino Anglers Association of Manitoba. This association was born out of the collective negative experience of Filipino Canadian anglers who did not feel accepted by the local groups. Instead of looking for a place to belong, Eric decided to create one instead. Their first ever meeting consisted of 10 members, and ever since, the Filipino Anglers Association of Manitoba has grown to well over 100 households with almost 200 individual members. His association's mandate is to provide a welcoming environment for anglers of all cultural backgrounds and experience levels to share knowledge, make new friends, and exhibit positive community engagement in a family-friendly atmosphere. This grassroots organization has raised money for the Selkirk Youth Fishing Initiative and the Barangay West End Community Group. Additionally, their spring and fall Red River Shoreline Cleanup Initiatives has been very popular, with members helping to pick up litter at various popular fishing spots in Lockport and Selkirk. Every January, they hold a members' championship of ice fishing derby at Gimli Harbor to crown the Angler of the Year. This year, it was held via Facebook, with members submitting photos of their catches online. Madam Speaker, I ask my colleagues to join me in honoring and recognizing Mr. Eric Labopa for his positive work, sharing his passion with others across our great province. Thank you, Eric.
Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Madam Speaker, after the October storm of 2019, the Premier said if you get a chance to say thank you to some hydro workers, do it. How did the Premier thank them? He froze their wages. He forced them to take unpaid days off, and seemingly every day he finds a new way to undermine and attack their employer. Now, for these 2,300 workers, it means that they now could walk off the job because of the Pallister's government's mistreatment of them. Now, this is despite the fact that in Manitoba Hydro's recent third quarter report, which I'll table for the House today, it shows that Manitoba Hydro is projecting a profit of $111 million this year, $64 million than originally expected. Will the Premier reverse the wage freeze and allow Hydro to negotiate in good faith?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, where to begin, Madam Speaker? The member fails to recognize that the reality of the situation at Hydro that was created by the NDP is that their debt is now triple what it was a few years ago. And this was done not to help Manitobans, Madam Speaker. This was done to help the NDP politicians change Manitoba Hydro away from a company that worked for Manitobans' benefit to a company that would export power. And they rolled the dice with Manitobans' money without asking them, Madam Speaker. So the people, the workers at Manitoba Hydro know that record. The member likes to ignore it, but the reality is $10 billion of burden was placed on Manitoba Hydro, and therefore was placed on the people who work at Manitoba Hydro too.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, it's clear that this Premier and his government don't care one bit for the more expensive hydro bills that they forced onto the people of Manitoba. It is absolutely shameful that during a pandemic, when so many average families are just struggling to get by, that the Get Along gang over here chooses to increase their rates 3% this past December without even having a public hearing. Now, this report that I've just tabled that shows Hydro is profitable to the tune of $111 million this year was created in December. So the Premier knew how profitable Hydro was at the very same time he was ordering his ministers to increase rates without a public hearing. Will the Premier simply back off, allow Hydro to negotiate in good faith, and apologize to people for raising their Hydro rates unnecessarily?
That's right. The Honourable First Minister.
Well, the bluster, Madam Speaker, doesn't change the absence of facts in the member's preamble or his absence of understanding about the damage the NDP's done to Manitoba Hydro over the years. $10 billion isn't a small amount, Madam Speaker, but it could have been used for something other than building Hydro up for Americans' benefit. Could have been done to build new schools. Could have built 20 hospitals. Could have built 100 personal care homes. Could have put 1,000 new miles of road in, but it didn't do any of that. And who's going to pay for all this? Is it Americans, Madam Speaker? Is it the NDP? No. Of course not. It's Manitobans. So they hand Manitobans the debt while they tried to hand Manitoba Hydro away to American customers, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the member for Fort White is so obsessed with American customers, maybe that's why he's been neglecting the Manitoba Hydro ratepayers right here at home. Maybe that's why he increased their hydro bills 3% in December at the same time that he knew Hydro was profitable, $65 million more profitable than originally expected. And the worst part of all, he raised rates while he knew it was profitable without ever even bringing it to the Public Utilities Board. No public oversight whatsoever. The other point that we draw from that report that I tabled is that Manitoba Hydro International and Teshmont pulled in a combined $6 million to help keep rates low. With this knowledge, will the Premier now admit it was a mistake for him to privatize Teshmont and to cut Manitoba Hydro International?
The Honourable First Minister.
As a record of relying on propaganda, Madam Speaker, the NDP does. The member does too, and coercion. These are techniques that he uses. He tries to treat Manitobans with a lack of respect, Madam Speaker, when he acts like $1 million is a giant amount, but $10 billion isn't of any consequence. It is, Madam Speaker, it is. And the NDP dug $10 billion worth of hole for Manitobans to repay, Madam Speaker.
Order.
Now, the other thing is, Madam Speaker, he talks about a small rate increase, smaller than 6 of the 7 years previous under the NDP, Madam Speaker. And he ignores the fact the NDP actually raised the hydro rates on hard-working Manitobans by 40% while they were in power, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Let's quickly correct the record. Last year was the first time any government has ever increased hydro rates on Manitobans. They did it through legislation. Every other year, it was the Public Utilities Board. What are they afraid of, Madam Speaker? Now we know that childcare is necessary for an equitable recovery. But I'll table a document that shows that this government sat on a decision for over a year to, quote, eliminate the enhanced operating grant for nurseries, childcare programs across the province. When do they decide to push ahead with this cut, Madam Speaker? Right in the middle of the pandemic. Starting April 1st, parents are going to see their nursery fees double. There's nothing equitable about doubling childcare fees during a pandemic. Will the Premier reverse course and commit to affordable, accessible, universal childcare now?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, let's set the record straight, Madam Speaker. The NDP dug a $10 billion debt hole for hydro so they could internationalize it, never asked Manitobans once. And the member has the audacity to talk about the Public Utilities Board as if the NDP ever respected it. They went ahead, Madam Speaker, and dug that hole without even listening to the hydro experts who told them, don't do that. Don't go halfway around the province and waste billions of dollars on a hydro line that won't work as effectively as the one we're recommending. They ignored them. Then they ignored their people on the hydro board too and didn't listen to them. Didn't listen to them. The people on the hydro board tried to tell the member for St. John, no, no, no. You don't go up and waste billions on that Key-Ass Dam for some kind of a phony legacy.
Order.
You don't do that. You don't do it. But they didn't listen to their own people on the hydro board. And then they ignored the people on the Clean Environment Commission they'd appointed, and they ignored the people that they put on the Public Utilities Board too, and they jacked up the rates by 40% on Manitobans while they're in office, Madam Speaker. That's disrespectful. We're going to clean it up, Madam Speaker. They made the mess, but we'll clean it up.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, everyone knows that an equitable recovery will have to include childcare. That's why it's so shameful that the Premier couldn't even say the word childcare within his response. He's still flailing around trying to justify spending $1 million on the Wall report just to buy one day's media coverage when there was no new information in that report. But we know what childcare experts are telling us, Madam Speaker. Samantha Milne, a mother and an early childhood educator, says the cuts will mean that maybe her son stays home with me and I don't go back to work because childcare is so expensive. That is the impact that will be had because of this Premier doubling childcare fees for these families. It means that mothers will not be going back to work, will not be joining in on the recovery. Will the Premier admit that these cuts are wrong, admit that doubling the childcare fees are wrong, and commit to affordable, universal, accessible childcare now?
Yep. The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, the member chooses again to ignore the record of the NDP while in government in respect of childcare, a record that was blemished significantly by the reality of longer and longer waits for families to get the childcare he talks about. He talks now, in theory, about making childcare available, but while in government couldn't make the childcare available, Madam Speaker. He talks about keeping fees down. We're doing that, Madam Speaker. Our fees are the second lowest in the country of Canada. So, Madam Speaker, the member for St. John who rattles on from her seat doesn't seem to have the ability to get in question period. But she can heckle all she wants, and it won't change the record of the NDP government when it comes to failure on providing childcare.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the document I tabled shows that this government has been planning for more than a year to double childcare fees for these parents that we're talking about here, Madam Speaker. That is wrong. It would be wrong during any period of time. It's even worse to do that during a pandemic. Everyone else around the world says that right now is a time for accessible, affordable, universal childcare, except of course for this government, where you have a premier who says that doubling fees is somehow an improvement, and the minister beside him now saying in question period that this is cleaning up a mess. Well, on behalf of all the families who are going to be paying twice as much in childcare fees, stop. This is wrong. This approach is a mistake. Will the Premier abandon this misbegotten policy and instead commit to universal, accessible, and equitable childcare now?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, here again, the NDP leader wants to ignore the record, and I understand why he would do that. It is a horrible record that the NDP had on making childcare available. They created an inequitable system, and then they let it fall apart, Madam Speaker. So the fact of the matter is they own that record, and the member now owns it too because he's defending it. But he also is defending the record of the NDP when it comes to ignoring the very people, the families, who need childcare and need other things too. They need money on the kitchen table. That's why they didn't need their hydro rates to go up by 40% like the NDP did. They didn't need their hair. They didn't need to get taxed. They didn't need the PST to go higher. They didn't need to pay PST on home insurance. They didn't need to pay higher car insurance premiums. They didn't need to pay more to register their vehicle.
Order. This is ridiculous. I cannot hear the member's response. So let's not ramp this up from heckling to yelling. There's no advantage to that. That is not democracy at work. That's just silly behavior. And let's have people be able to hear the question and hear the answer. The Honourable Premier to conclude his response.
Same behavior I saw at the House of Commons Committee where the member for St. John's shouted down women who were coming there to talk about being oppressed in their communities. She shouted them down, Madam Speaker. She has no shame. See, the people, the women of this province, International Women's Day, they understand it's not good for them to have to pay more for hydro and haircuts and home insurance and car registration. Madam Speaker, we're leaving more money with Manitoba families so they can find their way. The NDP took that money. We're making sure it goes back where it belongs.
The Honourable Member for Point Douglas.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. Last fall, we raised serious concerns with the rising toll of addictions. Fortunately, under this Pallister government, things continue to get worse. Needle use continues to increase. There is an unacceptable rise in congenital syphilis. Overdoses and overdose deaths continue to rise at a staggering pace, and the minister continues to refuse to work with the City of Winnipeg on opening a safe consumption site. Will the minister today commit to working with the City of Winnipeg to open a safe consumption site so that lives can be saved here in Manitoba?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health, Wellness and Recovery.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Our government takes very seriously opioid deaths, and we are wanting to improve health and well-being for individuals that are struggling with mental health and addictions. That is why we have 6 RAM clinics. That's why we have expanded access to naloxone, and we also offer very comprehensive opiate agonist therapy services. So our government is taking action on addictions and overdose deaths. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Douglas on a supplementary question.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker, you can't fight what you won't see, but that has been one of the biggest problems with the addictions crisis. In Manitoba, data on the situation is out of date by the time it is released. Surveillance and reporting is simply not complete and released in a timely fashion. while other provinces such as BC and Saskatchewan provide nearly real-time updates on drug overdoses and timely updates on overdose deaths. In Manitoba, we rely on media and advocates to get the information out. Will the minister today make sure that this gets fixed? Will they begin to publish information on drug-related deaths regularly?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health, Wellness and Recovery.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm always thrilled to stand in this House and talk about the good work that we are doing around mental health and addiction supports. I'm not sure if the members had an opportunity to read the Virgo report. It's been available to the public for a couple of years now, but 125 recommendations came forward in that report, and our government has taken action on those recommendations. And I encourage the member to read the recommendations and look at the great work that we are doing on this side of the House to assist individuals who are experiencing mental health and addictions challenges. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Point Douglas on a final supplementary.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker, the Pallister government is flying blind in addiction crisis. And I encourage the minister to actually speak to those families who are actually grieving and fighting to have a place where their overdose deaths are documented. Advocacy groups are tracking an alarming rise in the number of overdoses and deaths here in Manitoba, but they shouldn't feel alone to sound this alarm. This Pallister government should be using the full force of government to inform the public and to reduce the harm on this public health crisis. Will the minister today commit to timely and public reporting on overdoses and overdose deaths in Manitoba?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health, Wellness and Recovery.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was so honored to have the opportunity early in my mandate to meet with the Harm Reduction Network and to hear of the great work that is being done by the peer advisory councils, to speak with our Grand Chiefs about the programs and services that they want to see made available within their communities, and to meet with stakeholders, Shared Health, Manitoba Health, and just hear about all the services that are being made available. And I encourage the member to take a really close look at all the good work that our government is doing, because it is many, and we will continue to build on that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Madam Speaker, last week I introduced Bill 207 for the third time. Hopefully this is what it takes, which would establish safety buffer zones around any clinic, hospital, or healthcare facility offering abortion services, as well as around public schools, Madam Speaker, from anti-choice protesters. Bill 207 protects women and children, as well as healthcare providers, from being harassed, intimidated, or persuaded on abortion. No Manitoban accessing healthcare should be harassed and molested by anti-choice protesters. And I'm sure that we can all agree that accessing healthcare should be a safe exercise. Will the Minister of Health commit to supporting and passing Bill 207 to keep Manitobans safe?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And access to safe health care is certainly something that we are very much in favour of on this side of the House, Madam Speaker. But I will point out for the member opposite that she herself was involved in an illegal blockade, Madam Speaker, and this type of situation, bringing this forward, this bill, is rather hypocritical, I would say. Madam Speaker, I think it's very important that the member opposite knows and understands that people have freedom of speech. We need to listen to those who are protesting out there. We do every day, Madam Speaker. We listen to those who are offering their guidance, their views, their opinions on these things, Madam Speaker. We will continue to listen to Manitobans.
Member for St. John's on a supplementary question.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. Manitobans attempting to access health for services are often faced with harassment and aggression from people who oppose their right to choose what they do with their bodies, Madam Speaker. Keep in mind that these anti-choice protesters don't only target folks accessing abortion, but all Manitobans, like those that are there for DNCs or labor or treatment or births, Madam Speaker. Anti-choice protesters harass everyone walking into medical facilities. Children are being exposed to adults holding posters outside schools, attempting to persuade or intimidate them. Will the minister support and pass our bill to protect all Manitobans?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Madam Speaker, I always appreciate questions from the member opposite and all members opposite when it comes to harassment issues in this chamber and in Manitoba, Madam Speaker. Members opposite chose when they were in government to ignore those issues when people came forward. There was no open door policy back when the NDP government was there, and they should all be ashamed of that, Madam Speaker. Now, this member, and still the harassment continues, Madam Speaker. But I will say, Madam Speaker, to this member, this is about freedom of speech. People have the right to protest in our province. We will continue to ensure that they have the right to express their views and opinions on these very important matters.
That's a great answer.
The Honourable Member for St. John's on a final supplementary.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. The minister's response is so unfortunate, Madam Speaker. It's unfortunate that for the last 2 years, Manitobans could have been protected while trying to access abortion services, but instead, all of those members opposite have stood up in this House and voted against protecting Manitobans accessing health care. Shame on them, Madam Speaker. I'm providing them an opportunity to right their wrongs by reintroducing Bill 207, which goes even a step further to protect our children from anti-choice harassment. So I'll ask the Minister of Health, will she commit today to protecting Manitobans and support and pass Bill 207?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Much, Madam Speaker, and it seems that the member opposite likes to pick and choose, who she stands up for, Madam Speaker. And it seems that if people agree with her, Madam Speaker, then it's okay. Protest all you want. But if you disagree with my views, then you don't have that chance. That's where she comes from, Madam Speaker. That's not where we come from. Madam Speaker, we respect the freedom of speech of those individuals out there to have the opportunity to have legal protests, Madam Speaker. They have to abide by the rules, the laws of our province, Madam Speaker, and we will continue to stand by those who are holding protests in a legal fashion, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Notre Dame.
Madam Speaker, women are bearing the brunt of the pandemic recession. As COVID-19 created challenges for families, it fell to women to fill the gaps, often putting their careers aside to do it. Yet the Pallister government has refused to create the supports that women need during this time. We need comprehensive paid sick leave for women and for all Manitobans. Will the Pallister government implement comprehensive sick leave provisions to ensure women and all workers do not have to sacrifice their careers because their family is self-isolating?
The Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as we celebrate International Women's Day, I was proud today to announce 2 programs that will provide benefits to women across our province. Benefits that will ensure that women have good paying jobs here in the province of Manitoba. Opportunities for women to be involved in new types of employment that provide stable jobs, better opportunities for them well into the future. And these jobs, $50,000, Madam Speaker, provided all of these jobs for the individuals. Moving forward, we know that there's going to be many opportunities, many more opportunities, and I can hardly wait to disclose that information here in the chamber in the future. Where are working, Madam Speaker, to ensure that women have strong...
The member's time has expired. The honourable member for Notre Dame on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, that announcement was for 33 women, and there are 30,000 women in Manitoba currently unemployed. Women are hit the hardest by the pandemic recession. Their unemployment rate is nearly double what it was 1 year ago. 30,000 remain unemployed a year after the pandemic began, and without intervention, this will leave lasting scars of the careers of many women in this province. We need a path forward. Comprehensive sick leave is a start, but women will need more, including significant investments in affordable and universally accessible childcare to ensure that they can go to work in the first place. Will the Pallister government meet the needs of women and commit to ending the funding freeze and instead investing in quality, accessible, and affordable childcare?
The Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We recognize that women have been most impacted during the pandemic, and that's why we've provided hundreds of millions of dollars for businesses to help them bridge to opening in a safe and sustainable manner, Madam Speaker. This allows individuals to hire women back, women in the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, women who are working in those jobs on the front lines. It's important that they have these funds available for these businesses to ensure that women have those jobs, Madam Speaker. And not only that, we've provided additional funds for seniors, for female women who have been struggling during this pandemic, Madam Speaker. We provided over 123,000 female women, seniors in our province, have received support through the seniors.
The member's time has expired. The honourable member for Notre Dame on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the pandemic has taken the deepest toll on women who predominantly work in healthcare, childcare, and service industries. When they and their families are exposed to COVID and have to self-isolate, they don't have access to financial supports nor access to paid sick leave. This is a deep unfairness for those living paycheck to paycheck. We can do more. We must do more. Will the minister meet the needs of women in this province and commit to implementing paid sick leave immediately?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I, first of all, want to thank the Premier for taking the lead in terms of sick leave with an NDP Premier out of BC that led to a national sick leave program during the pandemic, which is extremely important. Our government had temporary leaves for people during the pandemic, which we think is extremely important as well as providing numbers of dollars for childcare centres, including $1.6 million for PPE, $1.4 million for 1,000 ECEs to get supports under the risk recognition program, and over $2.4 million to centres to make sure people and children and families were supported in the childcare sector. We've done a lot. We will continue to work to ensure that women as well as men are employed here in the province of Manitoba.
The honourable member for the Pas-Camissac.
Kinana Skumatin, Madam Speaker. Children and youth living in northern and isolated communities have less access to essential health care services, care and support when they've been sexually assaulted. I recently introduced Bill 213, which, if passed, would be an important step towards ensuring health care equity for children and youth in these communities. Madam Speaker, will the Minister of Health commit today supporting this very important bill?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And it was indeed an honour to put a few words on the record with respect to Bill 213. We had a good, healthy debate, and I hope that debate continues, Madam Speaker. I really want to appreciate and thank the member opposite for bringing it forward for us to have a good, frank discussion about this on the record in this Manitoba Legislature. As I mentioned then, and I'll mention again, Madam Speaker, I have asked the Department of Health to look into this matter to ensure that we do have access to these kinds of services for children and youth in not just in northern communities, but in other remote communities in Manitoba. It's absolutely essential essential that we find ways to get them access to the services that they need, and we're committed to doing so.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for the Pas-Camissac on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Currently in northern communities, anytime a minor reports a sexual assault, they get flown to Winnipeg for healthcare, testing, and support. This not only creates additional layers of trauma for these victims, but also creates barriers that prevent youth from reporting sexual assault in the first place. Will the Minister commit today to investing in more resources for underage victims of sexual assault in northern and isolated communities?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And yes, I look forward to working with the member opposite on this very important initiative. I want to thank her for her advocacy role that she has played in ensuring that we're finding new, creative, and better ways to for our children and youth to be able to have access to these services, not just in northern Manitoba, but across in remote communities in Manitoba. So I have mentioned that I have asked the Department of Health to look into this matter, to come back with some solutions as a result of the member opposite bringing this forward. And I want to thank her for bringing it forward so that we can provide, find solutions to what is a very, very important issue for our children and youth in our province.
The Honourable Member for the Pas-Camissac on a final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill 213 would require the province to provide public annual reports on the number of healthcare professionals trained and approved to examine child victims of sexual assault, as well on the number of evidence kits available in all health regions. This bill is common sense, Madam Speaker. Young people deserve to know whether or not this government is investing in meaningful and accessible resources in their communities. Will the Minister commit to support Bill 213 today?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What I will say is that more important than just reporting is obviously ensuring that those individuals get the healthcare services that they need, and we are committed to doing that, Madam Speaker. What I will also say is that members opposite know that they have the opportunity to designate certain bills within the chamber to come forward for a vote, and I would encourage the member opposite to ensure that this is one of those.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Early childhood educators are a critical part of the economic recovery. They've been called essential in the pandemic, but unfortunately have been treated as disposable. Most families can only make ends meet if both partners are working, and without childcare, they will not be able to work and pay the bills. Now, while this government does blame the NDP for their ideological approach, it's important to recognize there was no universal, affordable, quality care under the previous government, and there won't be under this one. Why is this government doubling down on the NDP's failures on childcare?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And our government prioritizes childcare. That is why we invested $181 million in the childcare system this year, which is $20 million more than the NDP ever invested. Since forming government, we've also created 2,500 new spaces through our capital program. In fact, that capital program is going to create 795 new spaces this year. And our temporary childcare grant for home-based centres created 130 spaces this year at a time when we know Manitoba families needed it the most. Our government is committed to creating a childcare system that is accessible for all families in the province of Manitoba. I just wish the Liberal member would get on board.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to share the words of a childcare worker and advocate. Quote, I look at long-term care homes and what has come to light regarding private for-profit care homes. We see lower quality in private care. We see understaffing, unsafe practices, lower wages, and burnt out, higher rotation of staff because quality is not a priority in private programs, end quote. This should be a public service, like education. Why has this government kept ECE in the Department of Families instead of under education, where it clearly belongs?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity to put some more words on the record about what our government is doing to ensure that we've got a strong childcare sector in the province of Manitoba. We've also invested another $9 million for a total of $11.5 million in a new childcare sustainability trust, $8.5 million in startup grants by the Winnipeg and the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, and we've created a $4.7 million childcare centre development tax credit to create 682 new spaces this year. Our government believes in a strong childcare sector. There's more work to be done. We're ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work with the sector to ensure that all families have access to childcare in the province of Manitoba.
The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Central Services. Will the minister support the formation of a committee here at the Manitoba Legislature to canvass everyone who is employed through the Legislative Assembly? And Madam Speaker, this includes guards, interns, departmental staff, clerks, and the hundreds and hundreds of people who work here, to see about the resources and needs that employees here at the Ledge might have in the hopes of better accommodating a family-friendly atmosphere. An example of this may be on-site childcare. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And our government is very committed to making this a good workspace, a safe workspace for all members of the Legislature and all members of our civil service. I want to thank the member for bringing forward this issue today. I look forward to reading the proposal. And I'd also just like to share with her that that is why our government implemented a $4.7 million childcare centre development tax credit so that workplaces could ensure that they got those spaces for childcare on their workplaces as necessary. So again, I thank the member for bringing forward this initiative, and I look forward to reading her proposal.
The Honourable Member for Portage-La Prairie.
Madam Speaker, the Skills, Talent, and Knowledge Strategy was launched recently as a shared vision among post-secondary partners, industry, government, as to the direction and actions needed to accelerate our post-COVID recovery and advance Manitoba's economy and promote positive outcomes for individual and businesses. Can the Minister of Advanced Education, Skills, and Immigration share with this House how this whole-of-government strategy will have a positive benefit to our various partners and across the province?
The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education, Skills and Immigration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague, the MLA for Portage-La Prairie, for this very timely question. As the new Minister for Advanced Education, Skills and Immigration, it was my pleasure to bring forward the Skills, Talent and Knowledge Strategy. We are taking a whole-of-government approach, Madam Speaker. The strategy was the result of a collaboration with over 600 stakeholders, post-secondary partners, businesses, and immigration professionals, Madam Speaker. Employers consistently indicate that hiring and retaining workers with the right skills is their greatest challenge regarding competition and growth. This strategy recognized the need for a range of skills, from knowledge workers with specific technical skills to those general workers with basic skills. Our government continues to invest over $1 billion, Madam Speaker.
The member's time has expired. The Honourable Member for Union Station.
Madam Speaker, I believe, or at least I hope, that every member in this House recognizes the importance of investing in our youth. We know that Manitoban students, many of them, Madam Speaker, have to miss school once a month simply because they cannot afford or gain access to essential menstrual products. Will the Minister commit today to making menstrual products accessible in all Manitoba schools?
The Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage and Status of Women.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for that question. You know, we worked very hard in this province to ensure that there's many opportunities for women across the province, and knowing and recognizing that women have some of the highest rates, or that Manitoba has some of the highest rates of domestic violence across the province, We've provided additional funds for young girls for USB data blockers here in the province of Manitoba to ensure that women are secure when they're using their computers, Madam Speaker, when they are charging their computers, their laptops, their iPhones, things of that nature. So we're ensuring that Manitoban young youth are safe here in the province of Manitoba, Madam Speaker.
The time for oral questions has expired, and I have a ruling for the House. Following the prayer on October 14, 2020, the Honourable Official Opposition House Leader raised a matter of privilege regarding the government's failure to table several reports in contravention of statutory tabling provisions. In raising the matter, the member asserted that the failure to table these reports directly impeded her ability to do her job as an MLA and to hold the government accountable. The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader concluded her remarks by moving, and I quote, that the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province and to put forward information to this Assembly required by statute be referred to an all-party committee for immediate consideration, end quote. The Honourable Government House Leader also spoke to the matter of privilege. I then took the matter under advisement. I thank the Honourable members for their advice to the Chair. There are two considerations that must be satisfied in order for a matter raised to be ruled in order as a prima facie case of privilege. Was the issue raised at the earliest available opportunity, and was sufficient evidence provided to demonstrate that the privileges of the member or of the House were breached? The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader asserted that she was raising the issue at the earliest opportunity in response to a ruling delivered by the Speaker on October 13, 2020. This ruling drew the attention of the Honourable Member to footnote 106 on page 443 of Boscan Gagnon's House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition. She indicated that research had been conducted to verify tabling dates, and after the research was completed, the matter was raised at the earliest opportunity on the next day. After hearing this explanation, I am satisfied that the matter was raised at the earliest available opportunity. The second issue to consider is whether the evidence provided was sufficient to demonstrate that a prima facie case of privilege has occurred. The footnote from page 443 of Boscan Gagnon describes an April 1993 ruling made by House of Commons Speaker John Fraser. This ruling involved a situation where the then federal government failed to table a document in a timely manner as required by statute. In ruling on this matter of privilege, Speaker Fraser noted that members cannot function if they do not have access to the material that they need to do their work. In order to allow further discussion of the issue between government and opposition, he found that there was a prima facie case of privilege. The motion for the matter of privilege was immediately agreed to, and the issue was referred to the Standing Committee on House Management. In conferring with procedural staff of the House of Commons, confirmation was received that the issue of timely tabling of reports and documents in compliance with statutory provisions continues to be relevant, and that a prima facie matter of privilege could be found if there was a failure to table such materials as required by law. In order to determine whether a prima facie case of privilege exists, it is necessary to compare the statutory tabling requirements and verify whether the reports were or were not tabled within the legally mandated period. The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader, in raising the issue, noted that 3 separate reports were not tabled in a timely manner in accordance with statutory provisions. These include a report required to be tabled under the Path to Reconciliation Act, an annual report required to be tabled under the Climate and Green Plan Act, and a report to the Legislature on a comprehensive review of the Police Services Act. In looking at the Path to Reconciliation Act, sections 5(1) and (2) of the Act do require that within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year, the Minister must table a copy of the report in the Assembly and make it available to the public. There are also provisions requiring the report or a summary of the report to be translated into the languages of Cree, Dakota, Dene, Inuktitut, Michif, Ojibwe, and Ojibwe. In looking at the list of sessional and intersessional documents tabled in 2020, the 2019-20 report had not been tabled in the House when this matter was raised. However, I am advised on November 18th, 2020, an order was made under the Emergency Measures Act to move the tabling deadline to December 3rd, 2020, and is deemed to have come into effect on June 30th, 2020. Sections 5(1) and 5(7) of the Climate and Green Plan Act require that the minister responsible prepare an annual report on the programs, policies, and measures employed within that year to implement the Climate and Green Plan. The report is to be tabled within 15 days after it has been prepared if the Assembly is sitting, or if the Assembly is not sitting within 15 days after the next sitting period begins. At the time the matter of privilege was raised, the report had not been tabled, but was subsequently tabled on October 26, 2020. The date on the report is December 31st, 2019. Section 90 of the Police Services Act states that within 5 years after this Act comes into force, the Minister must undertake a comprehensive review of the Act and must within 1 year after the review is undertaken or within such further time as the Legislative Assembly may allow, submit a report on the review to the Assembly. The provision in the Act came into force on June 18, 2015. Subsequent to the raising of the matter of privilege, the report was tabled on November 5th, 2020, and the date of the report is indicated as September 2020. In speaking to this matter of privilege, the Honourable Government House Leader noted that there were exceptional circumstances this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that could be a contributing factor. I am sympathetic to the challenges that we have all faced this year as a society, the provincial government included, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the Speaker does not have any authority to override the statutory requirement for the tabling of these reports, even if there may be valid extenuating circumstances that cause delay in the preparation and tabling of the reports. For that reason, given that the reports were not tabled in accordance with statutory requirements, and due to the precedent of the 1993 ruling by House of Commons Speaker Fraser, I must rule that there is a prima facie case of privilege. As a result, the motion moved by the Honourable Official Opposition House Leader can go forward in the House under orders of the day. It is a debatable motion, and the House must also vote on and adopt the motion in order for the remedies suggested in the motion to proceed. And I have a statement for the House on the process for debating a privilege motion. Now that the ruling has been delivered for the benefit of all members, I would like to explain the rules and practices governing the process for debating a privilege motion and outline the steps the House needs to take. In accordance with Manitoba rules and practice, and as noted on pages 143 to 153 of the third edition of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, when a prima facie case of privilege has been established, the following procedures apply. 1, the privilege motion is debatable and amendable and takes precedence in debate over other orders of the day, meaning the Speaker shall call the motion for debate at the start of orders of the day on the same sitting day as it is ruled to be prima facie. 2, the motion is subject to all procedures and practices governing debate on a substantive motion. 3, speaking times for a substantive motion are set out in our rules 44(1) and 2 as follows. 30 minutes for members. Recognized party leaders have unlimited time. Should the debate on the motion not be completed by the daily adjournment hour, the motion will take priority over all other orders of the day at the next sitting, and it will appear on the next day's order paper as the first item of business listed under orders of the day. Petitions. The Honourable Member for Burrows.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, the background to this petition is as follows. The provincial government plans to close the Dauphin Correctional Centre, DCC, in May 2020. The DCC is one of the largest employers in Dauphin, providing the community with good family-supporting jobs. Approximately 80 families will be directly affected by the closure, which will also impact the local economy. As of January 27, 2020, Manitoba's justice system was already more than 250 inmates over capacity. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Justice to immediately reverse the decision to close the DCC and proceed with the previous plan to build a new correctional and healing center with an expanded courthouse in Dauphin. This petition has been signed by many Manitobans. Thank you.
In accordance with our Rule 133, Bracket 6, when petitions are read, they are deemed to be received by the House. The Honourable Member for Flin Flon. The Honourable Member for Flin Flon. If not, I will go to the Honourable Member.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Flin Flon.
I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. Number 1, the provincial government plans to close the Dauphin Correctional Centre, DCC, in May 2020. The DCC is one of the largest employers in Dauphin, providing the community with good family-supporting jobs. Number 3, approximately 80 families will be directly affected by the closure, which will also impact the local economy. Number 4, as of January 27, 2020, Manitoba's justice system was already more than 250 inmates over capacity. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Justice to immediately reverse the decision to close the DCC and proceed with the previous plan to build a new correctional and healing center with an expanded courthouse in Dauphin. And this petition, Madam Speaker, has been signed by many Manitobans. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background of this petition is as follows. Number 1, on September 4th, 2020, the provincial government announced that cancer care outpatient services will be cut at the Concordia Hospital and Seven Oaks General Hospital effective December 2020. Number 2, closing 2 cancer care sites in Winnipeg will mean a third of existing sites are lost, with the increased burdens placed on outpatient cancer services at the Health Sciences Centre and St. Boniface Hospital. Number 3, the cut of these outpatient services has provoked concerns from patients in Northeast Winnipeg and Northwest Winnipeg residents, healthcare workers, and cancer care nurses alike, who have stressed to the provincial government that the cuts are detrimental to the health of the area residents. Number 4, patients who do not have access to a vehicle or reliable transportation will be hit the hardest by this cut, with the burden falling largely on seniors and Manitobans on low incomes. Number 5, cuts within the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, including the provincial government's closure of the Concordia's emergency room and Seven Oaks emergency room, have already compromised healthcare access close to home for residents of Northeast and Northwest Winnipeg. Number 6, the deterioration of healthcare within the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority has meant increased wait times, compromised patient care, and worsened health outcomes. This cut will only continue to deteriorate the quality of care for patients while forcing more demands onto healthcare workers. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to halt its proposed closure of cancer care sites at Concordia Hospital and Seven Oaks General Hospital while guaranteeing access to high-quality outpatient cancer services in Northeast and Northwest Winnipeg.
The Honourable Member for St. Vital.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I may say Happy International Women's Day. Madam Speaker, I'd like to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. The provincial government plans to close the Dauphin Correctional Centre, DCC, in May 2020. The DCC is one of the largest employers in Dauphin, providing the community with good family-supporting jobs. Approximately 80 families will be directly affected by the closure, which will also impact the local economy. As of January 27, 2020, Manitoba's justice system was already more than 250 inmates over capacity. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Justice to immediately reverse the decision to close the DCC and proceed with the previous plan to build a new correctional and healing center with an expanded courthouse in Dauphin. This petition has been signed by many Manitobans. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. Early learning and childcare programs in Manitoba require increased funding to stabilize and support a system that is in jeopardy. Licensed not-for-profit early learning and childcare programs have received no new operating funding in over 3 years, while the cost of living has continued to increase annually. High-quality licensed childcare has a lasting positive impact on children's development, is a fundamental need for Manitoba families, and contributes to a strong economy. The financial viability of these programs is in jeopardy if they cannot meet the fiscal responsibility of achieving a balanced budget as all operating expenses continue to increase. The workforce shortage of trained early childhood educators has continued to increase. Quality childcare is dependent on a workforce that is skilled and adequately remunerated. Accessible, affordable, and quality early learning and childcare programs must be available to all children and families in Manitoba. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to increase funding for licensed not-for-profit childcare programs in recognition of the importance of early learning and childcare in Manitoba, which will also improve quality and stability in the workforce. This has been signed by many Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. The provincial government's program of cuts and restructuring in healthcare have had serious negative consequences, reduced both access to and quality of care for patients, increased wait times, exacerbated the nursing shortage, and significantly increased workload and the reliance on overtime from nurses and other healthcare professionals. 2, further cuts and consolidation are opposed by a majority of Manitobans and will only further reduce access to healthcare services. 3, the provincial government has rushed through these cuts and changes and failed to adequately consult nurses and healthcare professionals who provide frontline patient care. 4, ongoing cuts and changes appear to be more about saving money than improving healthcare. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to reverse cuts and closures that negatively impact patients' ability to access timely, quality healthcare. And 2, to urge the provincial government to make real investments in Manitoba's public healthcare system that will improve the timeliness and quality of care for patients by increasing the number of beds across the system and recruiting and retaining an adequate number of nurses and other health professionals to meet Manitoba's needs. This petition has been signed by many Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for the Maples.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. Number 1, the provincial government planned to close the Dauphin Correctional Centre, DCC, in May 2020. Number 2, the DCC is one of the largest employers in Dauphin, providing the community with good family supporting jobs. Number 3, approximately 80 families will be directly affected by the closure, which will also impact the local economy. Number 4, as of January 27, 2020, Manitoba's justice system was already more than 250 inmates over capacity. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Justice to immediately reverse the decision to close the DCC and proceed with the previous plan to build a new correctional and healing center with an expanded courthouse in Dauphin. This has been signed by many Manitobans. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Fort Garry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, the background to this petition is as follows. 1, the provincial government plans to close the Dauphin Correctional Centre, DCC, in May of 2020. 2, the DCC is one of the largest employers in Dauphin, providing the community with good family-supporting jobs. 3, approximately 80 families will be directly affected by the closure, which will also impact the local economy. 4, as of January 27, 2020, Manitoba's justice system was already more than 250 inmates over capacity, and we petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Justice to immediately reverse the decision to close the DCC and proceed with the previous plan to build a new correctional and healing center with an expanded courthouse in Dauphin. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Concordia.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Manitoba Legislature. And the background to this petition is as follows. Number 1, the provincial government plans to close the Dauphin Correctional Centre, DCC, in May 2020. Number 2, the DCC is one of the largest employers in Dauphin, providing the community with good family-supporting jobs. Number 3, approximately 80 families will be directly affected by the closure, which will also affect or impact the local economy. Number 4, as of January 27, 2020, Manitoba's justice system was already more than 250 inmates over capacity. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Justice to immediately reverse the decision to close the DCC and proceed with the previous plan to build a new correctional and healing center with an expanded courthouse in Dauphin. This petition was signed by many Manitobans.
Grievances. Orders of the day, government business. The House will now consider the privilege motion. I would call on the Honourable Official Opposition House Leader to move the motion.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the member for Concordia, that the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province and to put forward to this Assembly required by statute be referred to an all-party committee for immediate consideration.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for St. John, seconded by the Honourable Member for Concordia, that the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province and to put forward information to this Assembly required by statute be referred to an all-party committee for immediate consideration. The Honourable the Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, I want to say miigwech for your ruling today and your statement I think we're all in a little bit of shock in some respects. This is actually the first time that we have won a matter of privilege, and I have it on good authority that this is a long time coming, that this has not been seen in this chamber for many, many, many years. So, you know what I think I want to do, Madam Speaker, is I just want to take a couple of seconds here to read the motion again, because I think that the motion is quite extraordinary on this day, on this International Women's Day. And again, Madam Speaker, it is that the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province. I could read that sentence over and over in this chamber because it's quite extraordinary to be standing up March 8th, 2021, for this House to call into the official record the failure of this government, the failure of this Pallister government to respect the laws of this province. That's quite extraordinary. And, you know, maybe it's because we're sometimes often in a little bubble in this chamber, but I would really impart on Manitobans that would be watching this or watching the debate later when we post this, because you can be sure, Madam Speaker, I'll be posting this on every social media platform that I have, that today the House confirmed and affirmed that the Pallister government is a failure and that the Pallister government cannot respect the laws of this province. And that's extraordinary. They're the government. They're supposed to be adhering to, they're supposed to be honoring, they're supposed to be so diligent about respecting the laws of Manitoba. And they failed, Madam Speaker. They failed. And you know, when we started talking about this, probably a little bit before, but certainly we on this side of the House, the NDP caucus, started talking about the Pallister government, all of the caucus, all of the Get Along gang and their boss, not respecting the laws of Manitoba when they called an early election. That was law. We have fixed election dates here in Manitoba, but they called it in a year earlier because the Premier just woke up one morning. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna break the laws of Manitoba and I'm gonna call an early election. And that's what he did. And so it is quite a day in the Manitoba Legislative Assembly today to have the Assembly, to have the House, to have the Chamber here acknowledge and affirm that the government is a failure and that they refuse to respect the laws of Manitoba. That is extraordinary. So for Manitobans, FYI, and what we're talking about here today is back in October, I rose in the House on what's called a matter of privilege. I think that folks will sometimes hear that language, either a matter of privilege or a point of order. And those are, I guess you could call them like tools that we have as MLAs to bring forward concerns to the Legislative Assembly and how the Assembly is supposed to operate. And back in October, I brought forward a matter of privilege. And the matter of privilege was that the government, the Pallister government, was failing and strategically keeping back reports that by law are due. And they had not tabled pretty important reports. And so, you know, some of those reports, for those that are watching or those that will watch later on, is the Path to Reconciliation Act. The government, the Pallister government, is required by law to table the Path to Reconciliation Act during a certain time period, and they had not. The other thing that is required under law to table is the Climate and Green Plan Act. which is a pretty big thing. We are in the midst of a climate crisis, and the Pallister government, and we know what their track record is in respect of their so-called climate plan, which they just threw in the garbage. They didn't file that report as well. They didn't table that report. And then the other report that they did not table was the Police Services Act. And we know that they had research, they commissioned research on the Police Services Act, but they failed to table that report. And so it makes it very difficult for MLAs on this side of the House that actually care about Manitoba and actually care about Manitobans to actually do our job when we don't have all of the information. When you don't table a report, you don't have the information about what the government's doing or what they didn't do. And the government failed on tabling these reports. And so it puts into question and jeopardy my ability as an MLA to do my job. It puts in jeopardy or in question the ability of my whole NDP caucus to do our jobs, which is to fight for Manitobans, to hold this government to account. How can you fully hold this government to account when they don't release their reports? Sorry. Can I get a glass of water? Thanks. So, Madam Speaker, I want to talk a little bit about the Path to Reconciliation Act. I think that it's particularly harmful and disingenuous and, my favorite word, pretty gross, that the Pallister government can take its time or, doesn't have the commitment or the dedication to follow the law and table the Path to Reconciliation Act report. I remind everybody in this chamber and those that are out and will watch this, that this very building, this very ornate colonial structure is situated on Treaty 1 territory. And when you look at Manitoba, Manitoba's history, and of course across the country, but I would suggest to you, Madam Speaker, and I would suggest to members of the House, that Manitoba is extraordinarily situated when we're looking at reconciliation in this province. We have such an active Indigenous community who for generations have been fighting for our rights and recognition and to be safe in our own territories. And we have individuals from our own territories, from Treaty 1 territory and from my home community of Saugeen First Nation that actually started the journey for reconciliation. And so I'm very proud to share that, Phil Fontaine, who is my cousin, his mother and my grandmother are sisters. They are, each of them are in a family of 18, and Agnes, Phil's mom, is the oldest, and Nora Fontaine is the youngest, and that's my grandmother. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but in 1991, Phil Fontaine, who was the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs at the time, went on the National in the evening, and he did an interview with Peter Mansbridge. And they were talking about residential schools. And in that interview, Peter Mansbridge asked Phil about what his experiences were in residential school. That was a historic moment for us in Canada because not everybody knows or realizes that that was actually one of the first times in Canadian history that an Indigenous leader got up in public on such a national stage and spoke about the sexual abuse that he had suffered in residential school. And so, and Phil Fontaine then went on to become the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And so he started just with that one interview. He started this whole path to where we ended up with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and where we ended up with restitution for residential school survivors. In that one moment of courage, it started this whole domino effect. He comes from Manitoba. He comes from Saugeen Anishinaabe First Nation. He comes from Treaty 1 territory. We have extraordinary Indigenous leadership in this province. We have an incredibly courageous Indigenous women who are leaders in our province. And all of, Indigenous leadership, our Indigenous women's leadership, our elders, our youth, all of those are propelling this province, are pushing this province, are pulling this province towards reconciliation. And so it is pretty disheartening that the Pallister government cannot even take the time to operate within the laws of Manitoba and table a report that moves us, that makes us accountable towards reconciliation. I actually find that quite hurtful. And so, I said earlier in my member statement, I spoke about being at a vigil last night with the member for Union Station. That was an incredibly difficult vigil. And I've been to thousands and thousands of vigils in my life. I've been to funerals, I've been to feasts, I've been to memorials, I've been to protests, I've been to marches, I've been to ceremony, all in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited. But there's something so difficult in the last year. It feels like almost once a week I'm posting on Twitter, Indigenous woman missing, last seen at, or we're trying to figure out how we can support a family whose loved one has been murdered. There were so many people at the vigil last night, including Miss Jana Williams' family, including her mom. And at one point, while women were drumming, and it was pretty quiet, but women were drumming, and then all of a sudden you just heard just sobbing, like wailing. And then I looked over here, and it was a family member, and everybody rushed over to help her. And the community came together, they got her a chair, there was smudge. And that's why it's so important for these reports that are embedded in Manitoba legislation to be taken seriously. The work that goes into these reports, the work that goes into the reports reflects the works that should be going on in the department and in all departments. Reconciliation, the path to reconciliation should be something that happens and is explored and dedicated to and committed to in every single department in the Pallister government. And so, I'm happy today, I'm pleased today that this chamber, this House, this Legislative Assembly recognizes and affirms that the Pallister government is failing in respect of tabling the Path to Reconciliation Act. And it has to do a better job, Madam Speaker. I've spoken up in this House, particularly when the Pallister government put into legislation. So on that hand, they're okay to follow legislation when they're stealing money from Indigenous children in care. They're all for legislation there, but not this type of legislation. I've said it many times that you cannot, get up on your computer or your iPhone and tweet, support for this or for support for that, or, I've gotten up in this House, I don't know how many darn times I've gotten up in this House and I've asked for members opposite not to say our Indigenous people or our First Nations or the member for, the Minister for the Status of Women, I believe, the Minister for Mental Health said today in one of her answers, our Indigenous leadership or our Grand Chiefs. I know that people, it's very simple language. Don't use the our. Those Grand Chiefs do not belong to her. Those Grand Chiefs do not belong to anybody here. We're not your Indigenous people. It's very simple, and I don't know why members opposite persist in that possessive language, of Indigenous peoples. If you really care about reconciliation, stop saying our. It's very simple. And so, you get up, you tweet something, you say our in this house. Those are literally simple things that members opposite can stop doing. Stop tweeting about Orange Shirt Day when you're stealing from Indigenous children. Stop pretending that you care about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit when you haven't done anything on the file. I said it today in my member statements. Where are the calls to justice? What has the Palliser government done in respect to the calls of justice for MMIWG2S? And I don't want to hear that they the nonsense that they say that they've done. Not one of them, not one of the PC caucus were at the memorial, the vigil last night.
Order, please. Order. I would indicate that the member is straying from the topic of the motion, and I would ask her to be relevant in her comments. While there may be many issues out there, the member is asked to stick to the motion that is on the floor and speak to that motion. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Madam Speaker, respectfully, I am speaking to the motion respectfully. The Path to Reconciliation Act, tabling the Path to Reconciliation Act, encompasses what the government is doing towards moving towards reconciliation in this province, including protecting Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited. That should be a part of that report, but we don't know what they're doing. We don't have that report. We didn't have that report when this matter came forward. And I am simply pointing out the failure of this government. In this respect, the Palliser government is keeping hidden or not doing or doesn't care or is not dedicated or not keeping, doesn't want to respect the laws of this province by tabling these reports. At the time, they have not been tabled. So I think that it goes to say, Madam Speaker, it shows the lack of concern in respect of reconciliation in this province. And then, Madam Speaker, we know that included in this motion was the Climate and Green Plan Act that was not tabled. I mean, we're literally in the midst of a climate crisis, and the Palliser government doesn't see any urgency, none whatsoever, of tabling their Climate and Green Plan Act. If we don't get together, if this province, if this government doesn't get its act together, we're in for a very, very difficult time in many years to come. But it goes to show that alongside what was their disastrous Manitoba Green Plan, which they were paid, the consultant was paid a lot of money for, which we all paid for, including his $60,000 plus for airplane rides to go back home every weekend, which is really the antithesis to helping climate. We don't see an urgency on this government to deal with this issue. We on this side of the House know how important it is to have the information on the Climate and Green Plan Act. So, Madam Speaker, I just want to again reiterate today, on March 8th, 2021, International Women's Day, which to me, of course, anybody in this chamber knows that every day is Women's Day in my world. Every day we should be respecting and honoring women that are in our lives. On this day, the best day of the year, this House affirmed and confirmed that this government is a failure and that they do not care about the laws in Manitoba. Miigwech, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to say a few things regarding the motion that is now before the House following your ruling, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think context is important, and the first contextual thing that I would put on the record is, of course, the reports that the member opposite is referring to are not hidden. They've been tabled, and they've been tabled now for many weeks, and so they exist before the legislature and they exist for the public to read them, Madam Speaker. I think the member, although I'll give her the benefit of the doubt, maybe she spoke in a way that wasn't as clear or as eloquent as she would like it to be, but they are not being hidden. They have been tabled for some time. Now, the question about timeliness of their tabling is something that you have ruled on, Madam Speaker, and I respect your ruling. I think the context of happening last year is also important, Madam Speaker. A pandemic that was not anticipated and not welcomed by anyone, Madam Speaker, struck Manitoba almost a year ago now to the date, Madam Speaker. And it feels in some ways like it was just yesterday, and in some ways it feels like it was 100 years ago, Madam Speaker. But it was a year ago today that incredibly difficult decisions were being made regarding schools, ultimately regarding businesses, decisions that lawmakers, and all of us are lawmakers here in our own way, Madam Speaker, but hadn't been made in our living memory, Madam Speaker. And it was the NDP, it was the opposition, together with the Liberals, I'm sure, although I don't remember specifically, who demanded that the full focus of government, after they were done their filibuster, of course, should be on the pandemic. And that is as it should be, Madam Speaker. And I would say at this time, because it's worth putting on the record, that the civil service, the public service in Manitoba, pivoted from all the different things that they were doing prior to the pandemic coming into Manitoba and in the world, Madam Speaker, pivoted from all the things that they were doing then to something that they had not planned for, that was not anticipated, that could not have been predicted, Madam Speaker. All of their efforts switched to that. And of course, every day there were things that were new that we were learning about COVID-19 and the virus, seeing what was happening in different parts of the world, preparing here, standing up programs that didn't exist in Manitoba, Madam Speaker, sometimes standing them up in a matter of days or weeks, Madam Speaker, at the behest of the opposition as well, Madam Speaker, but of course for the benefit of all Manitobans were asking that the full focus be on dealing with the pandemic, Madam Speaker. It's not that this was like some flight of fancy of the government, Madam Speaker, that they decided to, let's go and work on issues around the pandemic. Everybody was saying that everything should be focused on the pandemic. In fact, the member opposite, the official opposition House Leader, the member for Johns, will say, there are rules of this House, and certainly there are, Madam Speaker, but the rules also say that we should be sitting in the spring, Madam Speaker, and we didn't sit in the spring either, Madam Speaker. That was all changed as well, Madam Speaker. The opposition, I don't think, had an objection to that. I think they supported that, Madam Speaker, because things had to change, Madam Speaker, during a pandemic. The civil service, the public service moved all of their focus to dealing with the issues around the pandemic, and that is what the opposition expected. That's what they were demanding, is what the public was expecting, is what they were demanding, Madam Speaker. And there were so many things that changed the course of those few months. And that does not mean that these reports are unimportant, Madam Speaker. They are important, but it's important also to put them in the context of everything else that was happening in the world, Madam Speaker. And I'm sure that had we asked the members opposite at that time, where should the full focus of government be at this time in the pandemic, they would have said, in fact, they've said it many times, it needs to be on dealing with the pandemic. And government, of course, isn't just the elected members. It involves, of course, the public service, who have done an incredible job over the last year in dealing with the many challenges. And so, yes, Madam Speaker, there are many timelines, of course, that we're trying to be met. The full focus was on the pandemic. And when it comes to these three reports. They have now been tabled. They have been produced. They're not a secret. But I think if you would ask Manitobans, Madam Speaker, if they were following this debate on this particular issue word for word, they would recognize that these reports are important. I think they would say that. But I think the one thing that all Manitobans and all citizens of the world have learned over the last year is maybe we need to have a little bit of grace on some of the things that happen. Businesses have been closed, Madam Speaker. We've been asked to do things in ways we've never been done before. We didn't have Christmas in a traditional way that we normally would. There are many other holidays that weren't done in the way that they normally would take place. Madam Speaker, it's hard-pressed to find anything that is exactly the same as it was about a year ago, Madam Speaker. So it is not that this isn't important, Madam Speaker, and of course you've made your ruling, but I think there's context around what is going on here, Madam Speaker, that the member opposite is simply not giving enough credence to, Madam Speaker. It is a once-in-a-lifetime, we all hope, situation, Madam Speaker. It's not an exact parallel, Madam Speaker, but I remember being here not as an elected member of the Assembly, but as a staff person during the 1997 flood, Madam Speaker. And there were days when the Assembly was suspended. I remember the then Deputy Speaker sitting where you are, Madam Speaker, with boots on, with rubber boots on, because he had just come from his own constituency in St. Norbert fighting the flood. And I'm pretty sure that probably broke some kind of convention or rules too, Madam Speaker. There are so many things that happen during an emergency that you need to deal with things at the time, that absolutely mistakes can be made, Madam Speaker. And this was nothing more than a simple mistake that was then addressed, Madam Speaker, with reports coming forward. But remembering the context, I don't think that anyone at the time, whether it was the 1997 flood or other emergencies that predated that in Manitoba, Madam Speaker, would have expected that there wouldn't have been some things that didn't operate exactly as they normally did. Because in an emergency, sometimes you have to focus on the things that need the important focus at that moment, Madam Speaker. And when it was raised to the attention of the respective departments regarding these reports, it was dealt with, Madam Speaker. So there was no malfeasance, there was no active desire not to have these reports out, Madam Speaker. All of the government and all of the public service was focused fully on the health and well-being and the safety of Manitobans at the time. The reports have now been made public, Madam Speaker, and I don't think that there is much more to this matter than that, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Concordia.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's indeed a pleasure to rise this afternoon. And just address this very important motion that's before the Legislature. This is an unprecedented ruling, I think, coming forward from yourself, Madam Speaker. Something that I think all of us as legislators need to take very seriously. We need to consider very seriously. And quite frankly, the motion that's before this House is actually one that I would argue is quite reasonable and quite should be quite amenable for all members of this legislature. Not to say that there's and not to make any judgments on past matters of privilege or points of order that have been brought before this legislature. We could certainly get into the merit of some of those. I'd be happy to talk about that. But I think, when we bring these forward, there's a tendency to say what has happened is so egregious that we need to, sort of overreact in our response, that we need to make, make a motion that would be difficult for, quite frankly, for the government to act on. And maybe not even realistic in the context of the business that we do as legislators. However, in this case, I want to commend our House Leader, who brought this particular matter of privilege forward, for being quite reasonable in what she's asking for, and by asking instead of, that the government, sort of self-flagellate and mea culpa and sort of go out in the press and sort of say how terrible they are. literally all that's being asked for by this motion this afternoon is an all-party committee. Now, I don't have all of the details, all of the history of all-party committees in this legislature, but I do know that it is a tool that has been used effectively in the past. Now, I take the government House Leader's assertions to heart to say that, he said mistakes were made. He said that this was obviously a mistake that was made by himself and his government. Again, we can talk about why those mistakes were made. But if we take that statement at face value, if it's a mistake, then he should be willing to join with us in supporting this motion and simply say an all-party committee that looks at why these reports weren't tabled would be in order. I think that's a fairly reasonable request. Now, I wanted to just back up because something that the opposition House Leader said was very true, and that is that this particular day that this is being brought forward and that the ruling was made by a female speaker to a female House Leader and supporting that House Leader's work and argument here this afternoon on International Women's Day is significant and should be recognized. So I'm proud to be part of a caucus that has as our House Leader a very strong woman and a very capable woman who has brought this forward. This is incredibly important that we take this seriously because, this has been a discussion now, not just in this country, but in North America and across the world about the importance of protecting democracy and the fragility of democracy. This isn't just something that we talk about or we say. These aren't just words. They have real concrete consequences. And so I think when we're talking about what are the typical, sometimes we talk about what are the norms within the legislature, and there's a lot of those. There's a lot that we sort of take for granted, but once we've gotten into it, on a day-to-day basis, we start looking at what are the actual norms or what are the rules and what exists within the rules. Sometimes these are just norms that we're following. Other times they are rules. They are something that's been set down. Oftentimes they've been rules for a very long time, or sometimes they've only been in place for a little while. But they are rules that were made by people who had good intentions and tried to do what is best to facilitate the debate here. But what we're talking about here is actually the law, and this is very concerning because this ruling specifically says that, quote, the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province and to put forward information to this assembly required by statute be referred to an all-party committee for immediate consideration. That's a very serious charge, Madam Speaker. That's a very, very serious charge. Failure to respect the laws. Now, this House Leader wants to talk about the last year and the pandemic, and certainly we all know the effects that the pandemic has had in terms of how we conduct business, how we conduct the business of government in our case, how we relate to each other as people, how we listen to one another. There are serious consequences, and there were serious ways that we have changed the way that we relate to one another. However, as I said, in this time when we're talking about the fragility of democracy, when we don't have to look very far, we only have to look to our southern neighbors to see that when norms are thrown out the window, when rules aren't followed, and when laws are disregarded, that there are serious consequences to those actions. Now here in Manitoba, we are seeing that happen, and it's been commented. I won't go too far into that down that road, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Suffice it to say that it's not just one side of the legislature talking at the other side of the legislature about concerns about transparency and about accountability, but it's actually people who have great knowledge about these issues, and those people who are commenting right now are talking from a place of protecting that democracy and protecting, first and foremost, our democratic traditions. And they've been critical of this government. They've been critical of the way that this government has has not been transparent, has not followed those norms and not followed those rules. So when we get a ruling like this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that clearly spells out from the words of the Speaker and from the words of her staff and researchers, this is something that we need to take incredibly seriously. We need to take a step back. We need to put down the partisan hats. Maybe we do need to work together as an all-party committee. And I would challenge that, every member of this legislature has the ability to support this motion, has the ability to say, party aside, it is important that we return to some of these norms and that we continue to prioritize those things that Manitobans have told us are wrong. Despite the upheaval that we've seen because of the pandemic, this legislature has continued to function in so many ways. We've continued to come here through the pandemic, even when the uncertainty was incredibly intense the first few days and first few weeks of the pandemic. We in fact returned to this legislature to pass a series of bills that supported people who needed the support during the early days of the pandemic. Then we came back in the spring. House Leader seems to forget that we came back in the spring. Though on a limited basis, we did come back as legislators. We asked our staff, we asked our clerks, we asked members of this legislature to put themselves at risk, to come to the building to debate laws which were important. This fall, we had a full session with participation virtually. We accommodated all members of the legislature and allowed everybody to speak, have their voice heard, and represent their constituents. So we did that work. And in terms of the work of the government, it never stopped the government from operating. It never stopped the Minister of Health from making cuts, for instance, closing cancer care in my constituency. That went ahead during a pandemic. There was no break or no stoppage to that. But there was a break and a stoppage to releasing information that's critical for us to do our work here in the building. So I don't buy that argument, and I don't think it's one that we should entertain here today. What we're seeing here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, unfortunately, is a credibility gap. And this is important. And again, I'm trying to put down my partisan hat here because, as the House Leader said many times in his remarks, we get up every day and we're critical of the job that they're doing. That's absolutely true. And that is our job as an opposition. However, what is very concerning here is that if one side is saying, something, if we're saying, well, you're cutting health care, which is true, I want to add, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Fact. And they say, well, no, we're not. That's a dispute over the facts, and that's for the public to decide. However, if the public doesn't have the information about that particular cut or those particular policy decisions, then where does that leave us? It leaves the government without no credibility. And I'm not just talking about the credibility of the government and the executive and all of all of that. What I'm talking about is all of us, is the credibility of all of us. And so this actually is important for all of us, that we all have the credibility so that when we go talk to our constituents, they have the ability to make decisions based on that information that's out there. And we're not talking about, Mr. Deputy Speaker, reports that aren't important. It's not like we dug up, and this probably could happen. Our researchers are have already looked at doing this in the past, but no, we didn't go and dust off some obscure reference to a report or an act that really doesn't have any relevance to the work that we're doing here. In fact, we brought up, these are incredibly important reporting mechanisms that are built into the legislature because of how important these topics are. And they couldn't be more important than they are right now. The Path to Reconciliation Act is so vitally important to who we are, who our identity is as Manitobans. And if we want to forge a future together, this is absolutely key to doing that. The Police Services Act, after a year of increased scrutiny of police services, of, I think, good intentioned, protest and coming together people to cry out to say, we need to look at our police services and make sure that we're providing those services best way we can. That is an act that wasn't reported on as it should have been. And the Climate and Green Plan Act, which, you know, I don't want to steal any thunder here from my colleague who may wish to speak this afternoon. But, you know, you can't talk to any young person in this province and not hear their number one issue is the future of our planet and climate change. How is it that this government could deem those reports not necessary and not important to bring forward? Well, I think because there was a deliberate action here. I really do think that was a deliberate action on the part of government. You know, every single minister who's responsible for these reports will get briefed daily on this. They'll know what reports are required by statute. They'll know exactly what is supposed to come before the legislature. And it was a conscious decision not to bring it. And I don't know why not. You know, it's, you know, we're happy to have this debate anytime. As I said, if they're going to bring forward their position, we're going to bring forward ours. Let the people of Manitoba decide. That is the way it should be. But if they're continually hiding these reports or not bringing them forward in a timely manner, that is where our credibility and all of the credibility of this legislature falls apart. And that is a very worrisome trend. So the Climate and Green Act, for instance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, requires that the minister responsible prepares an annual report on the programs, policies, and measures employed within that year to implement the Climate and Green Plan. Now we have a new Minister of the Environment. You know, I think this was before her time, but I think that it couldn't be more important for the people of Manitoba to see this. So why was this not something that was front and center for this government? The legislation calls for the report to be tabled within 15 days after it has been prepared, if the Assembly is sitting, or if the Assembly is not sitting within 15 days of the next sitting period. At the time of this matter of privilege, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the report had not been tabled and was subsequently tabled, but was not at this time when this was brought forward. Again, this is something that I think every single Manitoban would want to see. They're questioning the plan of this government. They're questioning the attitude that they've taken towards climate change. They're wondering what the plan really is. And I know I've read that report, and I still can't tell you what the plan is. It's hard to decipher exactly how this government is calculating their emissions targets and exactly how they're trying to manipulate the numbers to prove that they are doing something on the climate. But as I said, the most important thing is to have that information before the legislature, and that's simply what we're asking for here. The Path to Reconciliation Act, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This section, sections 5, 1, and 2 of the Act, require that within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year, the minister must table a copy of the report in the Assembly and make it available to the public. There are also provisions requiring report or summary of the report to be translated into the languages of Cree, Dakota, Dene, Nukta, Michif, Ojibwe, and Oji-Cree. And this wasn't accomplished either. And then, as I said, finally, the Section 90 of the Police Services Act states that within 5 years of this Act coming into force, the minister must undertake a comprehensive review of the Act and must, within 1 year after the review is taken, or within such a time as Legislative Assembly may allow, submit a report to review of the Assembly. Some of the most important subjects and issues of our time. And that is what was not presented by this legislature. Say that, you know, this just, well, what did the minister say? Mistakes were made. You know, mistakes were made. Well, that's not good enough, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You know, and I can't think of another example. I was sort of trying to brainstorm here. What's another example in real life, let's call it, where, you know, somebody could be, deemed to have, been in a failure to respect the laws of this province, and then be given the opportunity to vote on whether there's some consequence to that. You know, you don't get a speeding ticket and say, well, you know, mistakes were made, and the pandemic, and anyway, let's vote on whether I should see any consequences to that. That's not how the real world works. In this case, we're not even asking for a ruling or for a decision to be made on whether there was something that was malicious being perpetrated by the government or by the ministers. We're simply asking that we come together in an all-party way. That there's a committee to be struck, that there's a way that we can discuss this. And as I said, I don't have the complete history of the all-party committees that have been brought forward to the legislature. What I do know is that in the past, they have been very successful. There's been a lot of good that has been done by those particular commissions and committees. Because when you allow members of the legislature to come forward outside of this arena, outside of the sort of day-to-day back and forth, outside of question period and sort of the theatrics or the political theater of this place, and just ask them to get to work and actually do something about this, well, good things happen. So if the government was open to this, let's vote, let's support this, and let's actually strike this committee. If they sit down and say, oh, well, actually, as a matter of fact, there was a filing error, or, a certain member of the staff didn't bring it forward and the minister tried to but missed the deadline. I mean, let's explore that. But, I'm thinking, based on what the minister or the House Leader, government House Leader had to say, that may not be the case. That, in fact, there may be something else afoot. And I think that is incredibly concerning. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't want to take all afternoon here. I do know that there are others who do want to speak to this. And as I said, I mean, it's incredibly important anytime, but on International Women's Day, there is something poetic about that it's come forward, this ruling, and supported the work of our House Leader to bring this forward. I think that this is something that we should consider incredibly seriously, that we should take very seriously. We've got lots of time to get into debate around this place, and certainly we have very different views than the government does on how we should be proceeding. But when it comes to issues like this, I think why don't we get together? Why don't we find some common ground to actually figure out what the root of this issue is and strengthen these norms? Give people of Manitoba some confidence in the work that we do as legislators. Let them know that we can rise above this kind of stuff and that we will return to some sense of normalcy around this place and throughout democracies around the world. That's what they're looking for right now. And when I talk to young people, as we did over the last month, going into classrooms virtually, which was a different experience, one of the things that I always talk to them about is how important their democratic involvement and democratic choices truly are. As I said, if they don't have faith, if the public doesn't have the faith in the work that we do, ultimately they're going to make the decisions that don't serve anybody. And we're going to see something like what happened south of the border, and that kind of politics, that kind of blow everything up, light a match, throw it behind you and walk out the door kind of politics. I don't believe in that, and I don't agree with that. And I think a step in the right direction would be for all of us to come together to see how serious this is, and to actually make some decisions that hopefully will ensure that this kind of thing doesn't actually happen again. And that we actually can come together, we can make decisions that are for the betterment of Manitoba. And don't worry for anyone who's following along and saying, oh, this is all going to be a kumbaya. No, we're going to continue to have serious disagreements, but not about the facts. The facts are the facts, and that's what we're asking that the government respect by allowing these kind of documents to be tabled and this information to get out there. And maybe I'll just say, finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, maybe I'm getting a little optimistic here, but I know there's a number of matters of privilege that are still before the House for to be ruled on. This might be the beginning of a trend that that shows that the work that we're doing as opposition is serious, that we're bringing forward important matters of privilege, and that we are truly trying to hold this government to account. Again, not in a partisan day-to-day way, but in I think a way that strengthens the democracy of our province for the long term, because that is one of the goals that we also want to adhere to. We are the Her Majesty's official opposition or loyal opposition. I can't remember the wording, but it is important that we do take that job seriously. And I think this is a step in the right direction. We have a duty to do that, and I hope that as these matter of privileges come forward, that it doesn't become just a partisan thing. There was a moment where I thought the government House Leader was going to challenge the ruling of the chair, but maybe he saw you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the chair, and he backed down. I'm not really sure. Have to go back to the Hansard to check that. But I do know that it is important for us to respect those rulings, to respect the democracy and the democratic traditions we have. I do hope that the government supports this motion, that we vote on it in favor, and we move forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Before I recognize the member for Concordia, I believe it's the Honourable Member for River Heights' turn. Is the Honourable Member for River Heights available? Is he on Zoom?
Yes, I am online and ready.
The Honourable
to speak.
Member for River Heights.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to speak for a few minutes on this matter of privilege and the resolution and the motion that comes from it. This is very specifically, as we have heard, the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province. That's a very serious matter, and I appreciate the Speaker of the Manitoba Legislature ruling that this is indeed a matter of privilege, and it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be acted on, certainly in my view. It is vital that appropriate documents are tabled at the appropriate time, especially when mandated by law. But I would suggest that also under our common law system that there are a variety of traditions which have similar function as laws, which need to be respected as well. And so it is important that government follows the laws and traditions of the province, and that the business of the province gets done. The government has argued that it was so busy with the COVID pandemic that it forgot about the ordinary business of the province, namely these matters dealing with reconciliation, climate change, and police reports. I suggest to the government that there's a whole lot of ordinary business which continue to the work of police and firefighters and garbage collectors and so on, as well as the provision of essential services, food, and various other services which are critical for the ordinary running of the province. And that the presence of the COVID pandemic, while it might restrict certain things, should not have restricted the ability of the government to be able to table reports, which in some cases, as we saw, the reports were dated before this matter of privilege was brought up and could have been tabled earlier. So the government clearly is at fault here for not respecting the law, and that needs to be considered. I also think that the matters that we're dealing with, reconciliation is extraordinarily important in Manitoba today. We need to make sure that we are recognizing the problems that have plagued this province in the past, and that we are dealing with them and moving forward in a positive direction. There is a big problem, therefore, when the government fails to produce the report and to describe the actions that have or have not been taken with regard to reconciliation. Climate change is another matter of extraordinary importance. Again, it has been described as the COVID pandemic has been described as a crisis situation. It is really important that reports in relationship to climate change are produced and are tabled at the appropriate time. And lastly, the third area was police reports. This is a report which was undertaking a comprehensive review of Section 90 of the Police Services Act, and that the report be submitted, and that this is, a vital component of continuing to have a province which is based on provisions of law and order, and those provisions in a way that serves people well, but also recognizes the needs of people who have mental illness and so on. So I would suggest that this was not a report that should have been delayed, that the government should have considered the breaking the law over this report. So these three are very important areas, and these reports should have been present, and the government should not have broken the law. Now, I move forward. The last speaker talked about this is not a partisan issue. Yeah, I agree. The NDP was significantly at fault at times when they were in government. I will give some examples, and they are not the only examples. July 1 of the year 2000, there was a deadline in law that the government present a sustainable development strategy, and that in that strategy there should be procurement guidelines, and that there were various components of that strategy which were deemed essential to be discussed, and that the strategy should be tabled. The government at the last minute, the NDP government in that period, I think had not adequately realized this. I raised this. They put together a short and inadequate report, and in doing so, they didn't meet the standards of the law for inclusion, for example, of procurement guidelines. I raised this this omission on July 6th in the year 2000. We were sitting that summer, and then I raised it again on July the 17th. The fact that the government was not following its own laws, and I raised this again on July 25th. I will quote from my question period on that particular date. Mr. Speaker, I said, my question is to the Minister of Justice, a minister known for his tough talk toward those who break the laws of Manitoba. It has become quite apparent that members of his own government have broken provincial laws by failing to deliver a sustainable development procurement policy by July 1st, by failing to have a complete sustainable development strategy by July 1st, by failing to call a meeting of the Roundtable on Sustainable Development in more than 1 year. I ask the Minister of Justice, what is he doing to address the lawbreakers in his own government? This was not the only time that I raised such concerns of the government breaking its own laws. Later on, and this is relevant, we are dealing with the climate change plan. On July 19th, I raised concerns that the action plan that the government had produced was incomplete. I asked, can the minister explain why his sustainable development strategy, which was a COSD report, does not include the action plan which he's talking about to reduce greenhouse emissions in Manitoba? And then a follow-up question, my supplementary to the minister, since there was a July 1 deadline for producing this strategy, and you didn't meet it, and it was a legal deadline, I was asked the minister whether he believes that individuals are not necessary to meet legal deadlines for getting driver's licenses or hunting licenses or fishing licenses or paying taxes. I mean, if individuals was as cavalier as his ministry, this would be a very poorly functioning province. Can the minister please explain why he is being so cavalier? Tabling reports and getting them right is very important, no matter which government. And if you don't get things right, if you don't develop and put forward good strategies, you won't succeed. On July 20th of that same year, 2000, I asked again, what are the minister's plans in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? I pointed out that the minister was due to reduce Manitoba's greenhouse gas emissions by 6.5 megatons to a level of 16.2 megatons as required under our international agreements, and that was the Paris climate change. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the problem of not bringing in an adequate strategy was that the government, in 17 years, this is 17 years of NDP government, they completely failed to reach the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 6.5 megatons. If you don't produce documents, if you don't adequately report on a timely basis, you will fall behind. And that is a problem for our province. That is a problem when things don't get done. When the reports and don't get tabled, it means that everything gets delayed and action gets delayed, and the work of the province doesn't get done properly. Putting forward and having a committee to look at the requirements of the rules and the fulfillment of these rules would be a useful exercise. It would be important, I suggest, to whatever government may be in place now and in the future, it would be useful to have this as an all-party committee, because it is not just a problem of this government, it is also a problem experienced under the former NDP government. When laws are broken, when mistakes are made, it is good to have a committee to look at them. This is a normal procedure. It is good to have a committee to make recommendations as to how this problem is avoided in the future. Because when this problem happens, it is not just that laws are broken, but that strategies don't get properly implemented, well-meaning intentions don't get followed through, and the work of this province doesn't get done properly. So, Deputy Speaker, those are my comments on this motion. I hope that all members will agree that there should be a committee to meet and to suggest some solutions to this breaking of laws by governments. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. As an MLA, we have the opportunity to raise matters of privilege, breaches to our privileges that impact our abilities as MLAs and as opposition to do our jobs. I'm going to take some time to read out loud the matter of privilege that the member from St. John's brought forward, which is important to highlight since we are debating its contents today, and it was almost 6 months ago that the matter of privilege was raised. So let me begin. It reads this: I rise at the earliest opportunity, as the breach I will identify of my privileges was based on a ruling only provided yesterday by yourself, Madam Speaker. I required time to assemble the relevant facts. I believe this shows the first test of the matter of privilege, that I rise at the earliest opportunity to be met. The second test of a matter of privilege, to show in what way my privileges as an MLA have been breached, are based on the following, Madam Speaker. My abilities to perform my job as an MLA and fundamentally hold the government to account has been undermined by the government's flouting of statutory requirements to lay before this House reports required by law. Madam Speaker, in your ruling yesterday, you stated, and I quote, "On the matter of tabling documents by a minister, Bosk and Gagnon, House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition," cites a ruling of Speaker Fraser from 1993, which can be found on page 443, citation 106. The Speaker ruled that a prima facie breach of privilege had occurred when the government failed to table a document required by statute in timely manner. This is a key element of finding a prima facie breach of privilege. A member raising the issue must identify where in legislation there is a requirement that a specific document be tabled in the House. End quote. And so, Madam Speaker, the facts are as follows. The Path to Reconciliation Act states, intersection 5.1, and I quote, "For each fiscal year, the minister responsible for reconciliation must prepare a report about the measures taken by the government to advance reconciliation, including the measures taken to engage Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples in the reconciliation process, and the measures taken to implement the strategy." End quote, Madam Speaker. And section 5.2 states, and I quote, "Tabling report in Assembly and making public. Within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year, the minister must table a copy of the report in the Assembly and make it available to the public." End quote, Madam Speaker. It is October 2020, long past 3 months at the end of the fiscal year end, and no report has been put before this House, Madam Speaker. The Climate and Green Plan Act states at section 5.1, and I quote, "Annual report on climate and green plan. The minister must prepare an annual report on the programs, policies, and measures employed in that year to implement the climate and green plan." End quote. And section 5.7, tabling report, and I quote, "The minister must table a copy of the annual report within 15 days after it has been prepared if the Assembly is sitting, or if it is not, within 15 days after the next sitting begins." End quote, Madam Speaker. The Climate and Green Plan came into force in November 2018. It is October 2020, and no annual report has been placed before this Assembly since that time, Madam Speaker. The Police Services Act states at section 20, and I quote, "Within 5 years after this act into force, the minister must undertake a comprehensive review of it and must, within 1 year after the review is undertaken, or within such further time as the Legislative Assembly may allow, submit a report on the review to the Assembly." End quote, Madam Speaker. The majority of this act came into force in 2009, and the final provisions of the act came into force on June 18, 2015. As a result, the minister undertook a comprehensive review of the Act and announced this review on May 29, 2019 in a press release. There has been no report submitted to the Assembly from this review. The Act states the government, and I quote, "must within 1 year after the review is undertaken submit a report on the review to the Assembly." End quote. No report has been submitted to the Assembly. What's more, Madam Speaker, no attempt has been made to seek further time to submit the report. What makes the breach of this privilege so egregious is that the Minister of Justice, the minister responsible for the proper administration of justice and the following of our laws in Manitoba, has ignored the statutory requirements that apply to him. In addition, the minister has publicly stated he's actually in possession of a copy of the report, but has chosen to fail to present it to the Assembly. This report is nearly 5 months overdue at this date, Madam Speaker. This flagrant flouting of statutory requirements that applies to this government directly impede my ability to do my job as an MLA and to hold the government accountable. The facts are clear, Madam Speaker, and so are the procedural authorities. What's more, I seek you to rule on this matter as quickly, as expeditiously as possible, Madam Speaker. Every day this information is withheld from the Assembly compounds and deepens the breach of privileges to members. Every day this information required by statute is withheld further, prevents MLAs in the chamber from doing their job properly. As a result of the breach of the rules, of the practices of this very House, of my privileges as an MLA and the laws in the province, I move, seconded by the member for Concordia, that the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province and to put forward information to this Assembly required by statute be referred to an all-party committee for immediate consideration. So, it's good to review what was spoken back in October, and today makes a day in history, Deputy Speaker, as the opposition has won a matter of privilege. I know how often we've been hearing that some of the matters of privilege that this opposition have brought forward have just been ways to delay or somehow impede the work of the government. But I think today's ruling really shows us the important role that the opposition plays when things aren't going as they should and when the government is not acting as it should. Now, as the Speaker outlined in their ruling, there are two conditions that must be satisfied: that a prima facie case of privilege be met and that sufficient evidence be provided. And Deputy Speaker, both of these were satisfied. As the Speaker explained earlier, and I quote, "The second issue to consider is whether the evidence provided was sufficient to demonstrate that a prima facie breach of privilege has occurred." That footnote from page 443 of Baskin Gagnon describes an April 1993 ruling made by House of Commons Speaker John Fraser. This ruling involved a situation where the then federal government failed to table a document in a timely manner as required by statute. In ruling on this matter of privilege, Speaker Fraser noted that members cannot function if they do not have access to the material that they need to do their work. This sounds quite similar to another situation we're in right now. The Speaker earlier continued by saying, in order to allow further discussion of the issue between government and opposition, he found that there was a prima facie case of privilege. The motion to the matter of privilege was immediately agreed to, and the issue was referred to the Standing Committee on House Management. End quote. Now, as we've established, the member for St. John's met these requirements, so let's dig a bit more into the contents of the Master of Privilege found in favor. On November 18, 2020, the government made an order under the Emergency Measures Act to move the tabling deadline to December 30th, 2020, and then deemed it retroactively come into effect on June 30th, 2020. And why did they do this, Deputy Speaker? Because they knew they were wrong. They knew they were breaking their own laws. But instead of adhering to their own laws, they just decided to change them because I guess this government thinks they're better than the law. The government's actions were not only shameful and disrespectful to all Manitobans who are feeling the effects of climate change, to all Indigenous people, as we all try to move forward on reconciliation, and to all individuals awaiting police reform. They also tried to blame the COVID-19 pandemic on reports that should have been tabled long before the pandemic struck. Now, I'd like to speak first to the failure to provide the report on the Climate and Green Plan Act. The Climate and Green Plan Act states at Section 5.1, Annual Report on Climate and Green Plan. The Minister must prepare an annual report on the programs, policies, and measures employed in that year to implement the Climate and Green Plan. And Section 5.7, Tabling Report. The Minister must table a copy of the annual report within 15 days after it has been prepared, if the Assembly is sitting, or if it is not, within 15 days after the next sitting begins. The Climate and Green Plan came into force in November 2018. Pallister's government has refused to show leadership or accept responsibility for growing emissions across the province. We continually hear them blaming the federal government for their problems. And they released a plan that has no real emissions goals or targets. Now, I recall, when I was gifted with the role of critic for environment and climate, I obviously spent a lot of time in study, and I continue to spend a lot of time in study. I won't pretend that this was a topic area that I was an expert in or that I had that kind of science background. So I spend a lot of time and study on this issue. So of course, one of the first things I did was thoroughly read the Climate and Green Plan. And it was, even as a non-expert, it was absolutely alarming to me, the vague phrases, the complete lack of any kinds of targets, any kinds of goals to work towards as a government. There was absolutely no accountability in this plan. And that was painfully obvious to me from the very beginning. And so, some of the other things that have started to concern me over the last little while, because I'll say, I can't hold the current minister accountable for this plan because it wasn't prepared by the current minister. But I'm very concerned that even our current climate minister has been on record to say that really climate is an individual's problem. It's an individual problem. You should just make changes in your own life and try to educate your neighbor to make changes in their lives. And that is the minister's plan for tackling climate change. So on one hand, picking fights with the federal government, saying they're not doing enough, but clearly stating on record that this is an individual problem and it's not something that you can kind of mandate people to make changes on. It's pretty hard to table a report that shows any changes that you've done if you actually haven't done any. So I can kind of see how this happened, but unfortunately it's also breaking the government law. This government hasn't followed their own plans or any actual laws on climate change. The Climate Green Plan Implementation Act states that the minister has to produce a report annually, and there has not been a report released for 2018-2019 or 2019-2020 to date. Keep in mind that most of the time frame involved in that took place before we were dealing with a pandemic. So any excuses about the pandemic taking priority just don't fly. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a way to detract and distract. What we know, what we can presume is that nothing happened, that nothing was happening on this file, so there is nothing to report on.
Order, please. Order. I would like to draw the attention of the honourable member that the subject matter of the reports in question is not what the motion is involved with. The remarks in debate of the motion should deal with the issue of tabling of the report and whether this issue should be referred to a committee. The member is moving away from the relevance of the actual motion that's on the floor and shouldn't be talking about the content of the reports, but about the tabling of those reports. The honourable member for Wolseley.
Thank you for educating me on that. Clearly, we're in new territory here, never having been in the position of having an order of privilege ruled on in a positive way for us. So I'm learning as I go. When it comes to fighting climate change, the Pallister government is consistent about one thing: being inconsistent. Flip-flopping on the carbon tax, creating uncertainty for Manitoba, and wasting precious time that we could be spent fighting climate change. So I want to just add to these notes that it's critically important that reports are tabled. As an MLA and as a relatively new MLA, this is how I learn to do my job. I read your reports. I actually take them seriously. It matters to me what this government is doing, and it matters to me what's happened in the past, and it matters to me what's going to happen in the future. But the only way for me to know what's happening on the other side of the house, where Manitobans' dollars are being spent, if you are, your budget goals are lining up with your policy goals, the only way for any Manitoban to have that information, including MLAs in this house, are to have those reports tabled in a timely manner. Now, I'd also like to speak a little bit about the Path to Reconciliation Act. The Path to Reconciliation Act states in Section 5.1, for each fiscal year, the minister responsible for reconciliation must prepare a report about the measures taken by the government to advance reconciliation, including the measures taken to engage Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples in the reconciliation process, and the measures taken to implement the strategy. And Section 5.2 states, tabling report in Assembly and making public within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year, the minister must table a copy of the report in the Assembly and make it available to the public. To this day, we have not seen this report. The Pallister government has a statutory responsibility to produce a report on the steps they have taken to advance reconciliation, and they have not met that test. Instead, they propose watering down the reporting requirements. If you see last year's Minor Amendments Act, Bill 11, which was not passed, it's not surprising in 2016 the Pallister government promised to produce a duty to consult framework by May 2017. However, they didn't create this framework until 3 years later in 2020. The entire board of Manitoba Hydro resigned because of the Pallister government's failure to work with Indigenous communities. And the Premier called the MMF a special interest group and said an agreement his hydro board negotiated was hush money. The Premier has also called the division over night hunting a race war.
Order, please. The member has strayed again from relevance and is talking now more about the content of the reports, and I would urge her, she needs to be talking about the need or want for those reports to be tabled, and then the motion that this goes before a committee of the House. So it's very limited in terms of the scope of what she could be talking about. So I would urge her to bring her comments very specifically to why those reports are or are not tabled, and speak specifically to that. The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Madam Speaker, I guess it's just a bit perplexing to me when these reports have not been tabled and we don't know what's in them. All we can do is guess at the content based on the things that are said in the House, the things that are said to the media. So I was just choosing some of those quotes that indicated what we might find in a report like that if it had in fact been tabled to allow us to do our jobs properly in this House. And I'm finally just going to comment on the Police Services Act, which states at Section 90, and I quote, within 5 years after this act comes into force, the minister must undertake a comprehensive review of it and must, within 1 year after the review is undertaken, or within such further time as the Legislative Assembly may allow, submit a report on the review to the Assembly, end quote. The majority of this act came into force in 2009, and the final provisions of the act came into force on June 18, 2015. As a result, the minister undertook a comprehensive review of this act and announced this review on May 29, 2019 in a press release. A Statistics Canada survey released last November revealed that Manitobans' trust in police is the lowest in all of Canada. Only 34% of Manitobans surveyed responded that they strongly trust police, compared to a national average of 41%. Based on their track record, this government's Police Services Act review and recommendations are not credible or trustworthy.
Order. The member is still straying quite a bit and quite a bit further from actually talking about the tabling of the reports. That was what the matter of privilege was about. And I would ask her, she needs to be very careful in how far she's going with her comments, because she's quite irrelevant right now in her comments specific to the matter of privilege. The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just wrap up by saying that once again, the government broke the law. Section 90 of the Police Services Act requires a review every 5 years from its proclamation in 2012, and they waited until 2019 to begin. Thank you.
Are there any further members wishing to speak?
Yes.
The Honourable Member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I really find this to be somewhat of a historic day that on the International Women's Day, women in positions of power have called for a ruling and have made a ruling that really respects the rule of law and holds us all to proper account for that. So thank you for that. What was this matter of privilege really all about? Well, it's about three very specific reports that never got filed. It's about the law that says they should have, but it's about the bigger picture. It's about the actual respect for the law. It's about this government's decision to not respect the rule of law. It's really that which is the heart of the matter. Now, I listened very carefully to some comments that the government House Leader made. It was kind of like, oopsie, we made a mistake. Oh well, move on. Well, it's much more than that. It's really, Madam Speaker, how many times in the past have we called the government to task about being open and transparent, and yet here we are again with the government refusal, either by design or by their inability to do their jobs properly, that they've again not been open and transparent. You know, we've been accused by this government of doing something nefarious by raising matters of privilege. Now they're quite upset that, oh, it gummed up the works and we couldn't file some bills that we wanted to. But really, your ruling today really justifies why we are forced by this government to raise matters of privilege. If we were to just ignore things that we think are important as the official opposition, there would be a failure on our part to do our jobs as the opposition. And our job is to try and hold the government to account, to make sure that we're doing our best to represent the people's wishes that want this government to do the right thing. So, did it hold up some legislation that they wanted to bring in? Yes, absolutely. But has been clearly demonstrated by your ruling today that we're absolutely justified in doing that. Because here we are talking about the rule of law and following the rule of law in this very chamber that is charged with the duty to create the laws. We should follow the laws. We as representatives in this chamber should do that. So if we sat silent and allowed the government to break the law, then we would also be guilty and complicit in breaking that law. So I really want to acknowledge our opposition House Leader for her strong stance on this issue. And as you've correctly pointed out, Madam Speaker, we're not here to debate the content of those reports or the lack of content of those reports. We're here to debate this government's failure to actually produce the reports in a timely fashion so that we can do our jobs. Now, as has been clearly pointed out by speakers previous to me, these reports, in fact, were dated prior to when they should have been introduced, prior to when this matter of privilege was raised. And yet the government House leader says, oops, it was just a mistake. They didn't get introduced. So it really leaves one to wonder about that statement. It leaves one to wonder if we as the official opposition hadn't called them out on this, and if you, as the speaker, hadn't done the research, and kudos to both you and your staff and alleged staff that put the hours in to research this and to really come up with the proper ruling. If this government hadn't been caught, would they have released the reports when they finally did? Leads one to wonder, perhaps not. So that really lends credence to what the heart of this motion is, that there should be an all-committee investigation into this. Because to just allow it to slide is really just starting down the slippery slope of what else should we just allow the government to say, oops, we forgot. Well, we made a mistake. We didn't do that. We didn't do this. We didn't do something else. It is absolutely imperative that the meat and potatoes of this matter of privilege and this motion really come to fruition, in that there is this committee struck that talks about the failure in this case. But it shouldn't just be to point fingers and say, this person did that person did this. Really, the whole point of any investigation, whether done by a committee or anyone else, the whole point of it is what should be done to prevent something like this happening in the future. Whether it's these reports that we're talking about here or something else, what needs to be in place to ensure that the government of the day has the resources in place to ensure that they follow the law. You know, the government House leader talked about, well, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic and we couldn't focus on everything. Well, yeah, that's kind of their job, Madam Speaker, is to focus on everything that they are required to focus on. You can't just ignore some parts of what's required of a government simply because they're busy somewhere else. One is left to wonder if we still had a full complement of staff in all these government offices, if perhaps maybe this failure wouldn't have taken place. If there wasn't such turmoil within the civil service because of the actions of this government, would these reports have been released in a timely fashion? So those really are questions that hopefully this all-committee report or all-party committee can look at, is how the civil service, as it's been restructured, or some might suggest destructed by this government, did that have a bearing on what took place here when the government House leader stands up and says, well, you know, people just got busy and we couldn't focus on everything? Is it a direct result of a shortage of people? I think that's an interesting question that really needs to be answered. And that's really what this committee should be looking at. We've heard other members speak previously about the importance of the rule of law, and certainly that is important, as we've seen in some jurisdictions not that far away from us, what happens to the democratic process when those in charge, when the government in charge of the day decides to not follow the rule of law, but to try and create their own law just because they happen to be the government. Just because this Pallister government happens to be the ones charged with being the government today doesn't make them above the law. It does make them accountable for their failures to follow the law. At least it should. And that really is part of our mission, our job, our duty as members of the official opposition is to pay attention to the government and things that they're not doing right, things they've missed, things that we think are wrong, things that the people that voted for us think are wrong. If we don't do those kind of things, then we're as guilty as the government. So one has to ask, and perhaps that's another function of this all-party committee, was this Pallister government trying to hide something with their failure to release reports when they should have been? Were they trying to slip something by, not just us in the opposition, but were they trying to slip something by the press? Were they trying to slip something by the people of Manitoba? When did they finally get around to deciding to follow the law? When did these reports actually come out? Was it during a time when the legislature was in recess, rather than at a time when we were sitting either virtually or in reality in that chamber? Because it does make a difference, as you're well aware, Madam Speaker, the attention that items get when they're debated, discussed in the chamber, as opposed to when they're released at times when people, the press, aren't paying as much attention. So again, it gets back to the very important issues, and I won't go into great detail about what was in the reports or what wasn't in the reports, because as you've quite correctly pointed out, Madam Speaker, that's not the point of today's debate. We're not here to debate those actual reports. What we are here to debate is the actual need to release those reports or others. Because there's a good question, Madam Speaker. Are there other instances where this government has failed to report things? Are there other incidents where this government has failed to follow the rule of law? And I know certainly it's been a challenging time for everyone during this pandemic. But I'm sorry, the government doesn't get a free pass just because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Doesn't mean that they can or should fail to follow the laws that we've created in this very chamber, the laws that are designed to hold the government of the day to account. And there are a lot of things, Madam Speaker, that should be reported on as required by law. And now we see the government, through legislation, which obviously they're allowed to do. They're the government. They're trying to change some of those laws so that they don't have to report. They don't have to report as often. They don't have to report really things that were deemed to be important. And certainly some of these reports, I mean, we know that this government struggles on the path to reconciliation. So we know that that report is vitally important to not just us and our ability to do our jobs, but it's important to the public and the members of Indigenous communities to know that this government is being held to account on how they are doing, because certainly there can be a perception of a lack of action, and without the reports, people are left to their perception, which may negatively impact the government as much as anything else, because if they won't report on what they have done, then the assumption is that they've done nothing or very little. So, Madam Speaker, I can't stress enough how important this matter of privilege was to democracy, to the purpose of the rules of the legislature. And as you've quite correctly pointed out, this government failed in their duty to follow the law. They failed in their duty to allow us to do our jobs as official opposition. So then, really, the point of the committee that has been proposed here should be to look at the why of this failure. On purpose? Don't know. Is it just that this government can't really handle the responsibilities that they've been given because too many bright lights are happening and they've lost focus? Perhaps. Is there something else going on that the public, that we as opposition need to know about? Is there something going on, Madam Speaker, that the government itself needs to know about why these reports did not get released when they should have? Should each and every one of those members on the back bench on the government side be asking the cabinet, how did this happen? How did you allow this embarrassment to befall us as mere backbenchers? How do we go about speaking to our constituents, defending a government that clearly can't or won't live up to its obligations? If it was willful that they've decided to ignore these reports, that's quite an important matter that in and of itself needs to be fully investigated and the facts found out. Madam Speaker, I know that there's been any number of suggestions and proposals put forward on various other matters of privilege that have been raised about all party committees meeting to discuss these things. And as you've again correctly pointed out, this matter does require some serious investigation, because in fact, by your very ruling, we have been Perhaps obstructed is too strong a word. Perhaps it isn't in our ability to act as the official opposition. I would like to give the government House Leader credit and a certain amount of respect to think that at least he's not aware that these reports weren't tabled on purpose, that it wasn't that nefarious on the part of the government that he's a part of, that it was just an oversight, a blunder, a mistake, as he's characterized it. But that in itself is a serious condemnation of his own government, to suggest that, whoopsie, made a mistake, oh well, move on. I'm sure that if it was just a mistake, the government House Leader is as interested as we are in finding out why that mistake took place. How did it get missed? It kind of stretches my trust, if you will, that they made the same mistake 3 times with 3 different departments, 3 different ministers, 3 different reports. That is clearly something that we should be all very concerned about. If that's the story that the minister would like us, or the government House Leader would like us to believe, that they just made multiple mistakes because they got too busy doing something else. What else have they missed? Because, gosh, it's been a busy time. What other important parts have they missed? I'm left to wonder that. I really struggled to wonder just what else this government has missed. And certainly we in the opposition will continue to do our level best to find out what else the government has missed. You know, Madam Speaker, we've seen a lot of confusion and missteps and mismanagement of the whole COVID response by this government. Is this failure to issue these reports merely a symptom of a bigger problem? Is it merely a symptom that the government really can't manage the ship as they've claimed they can? So really those are the important issues that we should be getting this all-party committee to flesh out, to investigate, and perhaps to report back to this legislature. Let's not just leave the government in charge of providing that report in a timely fashion, though. Let's make sure that if this committee does happen and if they complete their investigation and there is a report, let's make sure that it actually gets released in a timely fashion so that all members of the legislature, all members of the press gallery, all members of the public know full well what took place, what the failures were, what the missings were. But as importantly, Madam Speaker, that all those very same people know what steps the government has now taken, or what steps the government will now take based on the committee's report, to ensure that they don't miss following the rules of law in the future. It's really just that simple. Find out what happened, what the missings were, put the missings in place to make sure it cannot happen again. And with those few comments, Madam Speaker, I will cede the floor. Thank you.
Are there any further members wishing to speak on debate? Is the House ready for the question? The question before the House is the motion of the Honourable Member for St. John's that the matter of the failure of this government to respect the laws of this province and to put forward information to this Assembly required by statute be referred to an all-party committee for immediate consideration. All those in favour of the motion, please say. Oh, is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed?
No.
I hear a no. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
In my opinion, the nays have it. The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Which, Madam Speaker, a recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote having been called, call in the members. Order, please. For the information of all members, for virtual sittings of the House, we are required to conduct votes in a different manner than during normal sittings of the House. For members in the House, the vote will be conducted in a manner similar to our previous practice. For this part of the vote, those in favor will stand to be counted first, followed by those against. I will note for members that we have modified this system in one respect. Once the page states the name of the member standing to be counted, the clerk will acknowledge that the member has voted by repeating the member's name rather than saying aye. Once the count in the House is complete, we will conduct an alphabetical roll call of members participating virtually. For this part of the process, the page will call each remote member's name alphabetically, and then each remote member must audibly state their vote, responding clearly with either I vote yes or I vote no. The clerk will then respond with the member's name followed by yes or no. Finally, after the bells stop ringing for any vote, the moderator and the table will need to take a moment to verify that all members listed as remote are actually present on screen and in their seats and therefore eligible to vote. This delay should be brief, but is necessary to confirm who can vote, because for remote members, being seated before the camera is the equivalent of members being seated in their assigned seats in the chamber when the bells stop ringing. So the question before the House is the privilege motion. All those in favor of the privilege motion, please rise.
Mr. Canoe?
Mr. Canoe.
Ms. Fontaine?
Ms. Fontaine.
Mr. Wiebe?
Mr. Wiebe.
Ms. Laughlin?
They have to stand. Call her name again.
Ms. Laughlin?
Ms. Laughlin.
Emily Asagwara?
Emily Asagwara.
Mr. Voslev?
Mr. Voslev.
Ms. Naylor?
Ms. Naylor.
Ms. Adams?
Ms. Adams.
Mr. Altamare?
Mr. Altamare.
All those in the chamber opposed to the motion, please rise.
Honourable Mr. Gertson?
Honourable Mr. Gertson.
Honourable Mrs. Stephenson?
Honourable Mrs. Stephenson.
Honourable Mr. Fielding?
Honourable Mr. Fielding.
Honourable Mr. Schuler?
Honourable Mr. Schuler.
Honourable Mr. Peterson?
Honourable Mr. Peterson.
Honourable Mr. Friesen?
Honourable Mr. Friesen.
Honourable Mr. Cullen?
Honourable Mr. Cullen.
Honourable Ms. Squires?
Honourable Ms. Squires.
Honourable Mr. Johnson, Interlake Gimli?
Honourable Mr. Johnson, Interlake Gimli.
Honourable Mrs. Cox?
Honourable Mrs. Cox.
Honourable Mr. Eichler?
Honourable Mr. Eichler.
Honourable Ms. Gordon?
Honourable Ms. Gordon.
Honourable Mr. Owasco?
Honourable Mr. Owasco.
Honourable Mrs. Guimard?
Honourable Mrs. Guimard.
Honourable Mr. Helwer?
Honourable Mr. Helwer.
Mr. Reyes?
Mr. Reyes.
We will now conduct the alphabetical roll call of members participating virtually, asking each remote member to audibly state their vote, responding clearly with either I vote yes or I vote no. I would also remind members to unmute their mics only when they are recognized and then immediately mute it again once they have declared their vote.
Mr. Brar?
I vote yes.
Mr. Brar votes yes.
Mr. Bushy?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bushy votes yes.
Honourable Ms. Clark?
We did not hear Honourable Ms. Clark. Could she unmute and try again? We are having difficulty hearing Honourable Ms. Clark.
Can the member unmute her mic?
Is your microphone plugged in? Is your headset plugged in? We are not hearing you. Can you nod your head yes or nod your head no?
Honourable Mr. Gerard.
I vote yes.
Honourable Mr. Gerard votes yes.
Mr. Ginter.
I vote no.
Mr. Ginter votes no.
Mr. Eastleifson.
I vote no.
Mr. Eastleifson votes no.
Mr. Johnston Assiniboia.
I vote no.
Mr. Johnston Assiniboia votes no.
Mr. Lagasse.
I vote no.
Mr. Lagasse votes no.
Mr. Lajmodier.
I vote no.
Mr. Lajmodier votes no.
Mr. Lamont.
I vote yes.
Mr. Lamont votes yes.
Ms. Lamoureux.
I vote yes.
Ms. Lamoureux votes yes.
Mr. Lindsay.
I vote yes.
Mr. Lindsay votes yes.
Mr. Malloway.
I vote yes.
Mr. Malloway votes yes.
Ms. Marcelino.
I vote yes.
Ms. Marcelino votes yes.
Mr. Martin.
I vote no.
Mr. Martin votes no.
Mr. Mikuleski.
I vote no.
Mr. Mikuleski votes no.
Mr. Mickelfield.
I vote no.
Mr. Mickelfield votes no.
Ms. Morley-Lecomte.
I vote no.
Ms. Morley-Lecomte votes no.
Mr. Moses.
I vote yes.
Mr. Moses votes yes.
Mr. Nesbitt.
I vote no.
Mr. Nesbitt votes no.
Mr. Paniuk.
I vote no.
Mr. Paniuk votes no.
Mr. Sala.
I vote yes.
Mr. Sala votes yes.
Mr. Sandhu.
I vote yes.
Mr. Sandhu votes yes.
Mr. Smith Lajmodier.
I vote no.
Mr. Smith Lajmodier votes no.
Mrs. Smith Point Douglas.
I vote yes.
Mrs. Smith Point Douglas votes yes.
Mr. Smook.
I vote no.
Mr. Smook votes no.
Mr. Teitzma.
I vote no.
Mr. Teitzma votes no.
Mr. Wishart.
Could you unmute Mr. Wishart? Mr. Wishart is still muted. Is he muted with the moderators?
Yes.
Okay, please unmute him.
I can ask him to unmute.
Mr. Wishart, could you unmute please and try again?
Old head shake.
There. Mr. Wishart, can you please?
I vote no.
You vote no. Mr. Wishart votes no.
Mr. Wolchuk.
I vote no.
Mr. Wolchuk votes no.
Well done. Good job.
Boring.
21 yeas, 33 nays.
The motion is accordingly defeated. The hour being fast past 5 p.m., this House is adjourned and stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.